Margaret Carter pressed her palm flat against her daughter's bedroom door and smiled at the sound of Hannah crying on the other side. Not a worried smile, not a guilty one, a satisfied one. She had made the call to Ryan Brooks 40 minutes ago, her voice steady and rehearsed, telling him that Hannah had changed her mind, that she had packed a bag and left with someone else, that she had never really loved him, that she was embarrassed to say it to his face. Then she had walked down the hall, knocked on Hannah's door, and told her daughter that Ryan had called off everything because he had feelings for Lily. Margaret straightened her blouse and walked back to the kitchen to put the kettle on. If this story speaks to you, stay with me until the very end. Hit the like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning of the wedding, Hannah Carter ironed a dress she had no intention of wearing. It was pale blue, the kind of color people pick when they want to look soft and unthreatening, and it had been hanging on the back of her closet door for 3 days. She'd bought it for the rehearsal dinner 2 weeks ago, before everything fell apart, and she hadn't been able to bring herself to return it. Returning it would have meant going back to the store, making conversation with the woman at the register, explaining that plans had changed. It was easier to just iron out the wrinkles and pretend she was somebody who still had a plan. She set the iron down and sat on the edge of her bed. The house was quiet. Her mother had left early, to help Lily get ready, she'd said, which was true, and which also meant that Margaret Carter had chosen which daughter needed her more on this particular Saturday morning, and Hannah had not been that daughter. That hadn't surprised Hannah. It had been the natural order of things in their household for as long as she could remember. Lily was younger, louder, more easily upset. Hannah was the one who managed. She pressed her hand against her stomach. It had become a habit in the past 3 weeks, that small, unconscious gesture, palm flat against the place just below her navel. She wasn't showing yet. She was barely 8 weeks along, but her body already felt different to her. Heavier in some way that had nothing to do with weight, more fragile in a way she resented but couldn't argue with. She had not told anyone. Ryan didn't know. Her mother didn't know. Lily, who would be standing at the front of Calvary Presbyterian in, Hannah checked the clock on her nightstand, 4 hours and 12 minutes, certainly didn't know. Hannah wasn't sure she had fully decided to keep that information to herself. It had started as a delay. She would tell Ryan when things calmed down. She would tell Ryan when she understood what had happened, when she had some version of the story that made sense. But things hadn't calmed down. Things had collapsed with a speed she still couldn't entirely follow. 6 weeks ago, she and Ryan had been together. Not just dating, genuinely together. The kind of together that means you've started thinking in terms of we instead of I, that you've started leaving space in your dresser drawer and answering questions about the future without panic. They had been talking about an apartment. They had been talking about fall. Then her mother had told her that Ryan had called, that he'd said he needed space, that he'd said things had moved too fast, that he'd been spending more time with Lily because Lily was going through something hard, and he felt guilty, and the guilt had become something else, and he was sorry, but he thought Hannah deserved to know the truth rather than have him pretend. Hannah had not called Ryan back. She had been too stunned, and then too hurt. And then her mother had been there every day reinforcing the story, adding details, explaining Ryan's behavior at the last family dinner, reminding Hannah of the way he'd looked at Lily at Christmas, until the story became the only version Hannah had. She had not talked to Ryan directly. She understood now, sitting on the edge of her bed with her hand pressed to her stomach, that this was the thing she could not explain or justify. She had not talked to him. She had let her mother translate the collapse of her relationship to her, and she had believed it because her mother was her mother, and Hannah had spent 31 years learning to trust the woman's account of reality even when it felt wrong. It had felt wrong. She told herself that was just grief. The engagement between Ryan and Lily had been announced 11 days after that phone call, an announcement that had arrived via a mass text from her mother, the kind of announcement that carried an implicit instruction. Respond warmly or don't respond at all. Hannah had not responded at all. She stood up and looked at the blue dress. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put it on. She told herself she was going to the church because not going would have caused a scene. She told herself she was going because Lily was still her sister, regardless of what had happened, and because their mother would never let her hear the end of it if she stayed home, and because she was a grown woman who could sit in a pew for 45 minutes without falling apart. She sat in the back. She watched their mother escort Lily down the side aisle toward the staging area with a hand between Lily's shoulder blades, guiding her the way you guide someone fragile and precious. Margaret Carter was wearing champagne silk. She looked triumphant in a way that most people probably read as joyful, but Hannah had spent enough time studying her mother's face to know the difference. Ryan was at the front of the church already. He was wearing a charcoal suit and his shoulders were tight in a way that meant he was either nervous or holding something back. He looked once toward the rear of the church, a brief, reflexive scan, and for a half second his eyes landed on Hannah. His expression didn't change. He looked away. She hadn't expected it to hurt as much as it did. The ceremony was traditional, short readings, an exchange of vows that Lily had apparently written herself, a moment where the officiant asked if anyone had cause to speak or forever hold their peace, and the church went very quiet, and Hannah sat with both hands folded in her lap and said nothing, because she didn't know what the cause was. She only knew that something had been broken, and she didn't understand how, and the not understanding was its own kind of grief. Afterward, in the parking lot, while the guests moved toward their cars and the sound of voices and car doors carried through the autumn air, Hannah stood beside her own car and tried to remember how breathing worked. Her mother found her there. "You came," Margaret said. It was not warmly said. "She's my sister." "I wasn't sure you'd be mature enough to put that first." Hannah looked at her. "I should go. The reception is at the Harmon house. You're expected." "I'm not going to the reception." Her mother's eyes moved over her face with the practiced efficiency of someone searching for a weakness. "Don't make this about yourself." "I'm not." Hannah opened her car door. "Tell Lily, congratulations." She drove. She didn't go home. She took the interstate north and drove until the city thinned out and the exits started getting farther apart, and somewhere around the 90-minute mark she pulled into the parking lot of a gas station and sat with the engine running and her hands in her lap. She was pregnant with Ryan Brooks's twins. She did not know this yet, that there were two. She would find that out 6 weeks from now, at her first prenatal appointment with a doctor in a town she had not yet chosen, when a technician would turn a monitor toward her and say, very calmly, "There are 2 heartbeats." Hannah would cry then, in a way she had not cried at the wedding, ugly and relieved and terrified all at once. But sitting in the gas station parking lot, she only knew the one thing. She was pregnant, she was alone, and the man whose child she was carrying had just married her sister in front of 200 people. She could not stay. She had understood this at some point during the ceremony, not as a dramatic realization, but as a quiet mechanical truth. The way you understand that a door is locked, not because you've thought it through, but because you've pushed on it and it doesn't move. She could not stay in this city and raise this child within reach of her mother's management and Lily's oblivious proximity and Ryan's life that had moved on without her. She could not do it. She pulled up a map on her phone and looked at it for a while. She had a college friend, Deb Okafor, who had moved to a small town in Tennessee about 3 years ago to take over her grandmother's property. Hannah had visited once. The town was called Mill Haven, population 4,000 maybe. A main street with a diner and a hardware store and a library that doubled as the local history museum. The school district had been hiring, Deb had mentioned once, because the town was small enough that qualified teachers were hard to keep. Hannah put the car in reverse. She left that night without going back to her apartment to pack properly. She would return 2 weeks later when her mother and Lily were at a brunch and take what she needed. She would turn in her notice to the school district where she'd been working as a sub. She would file a change of address with the post office. She would do all of this quietly and without ceremony, and she would not call Ryan, and she would not explain herself to her mother, and she would begin, with the particular stubbornness of someone who has run out of other options, the work of building a life from scratch. Mill Haven, Tennessee, did not make her feel better immediately. She hadn't expected it to. She was practical enough about grief to know it doesn't respond to geography. You carry it with you the way you carry everything else, in your body and your habits and the thoughts that find you at 3 a.m. when the house is too quiet. She had not moved to Mill Haven to feel better. She had moved to Mill Haven to be somewhere that no one knew her, where she could be whoever she needed to be without the weight of other people's existing versions of her pressing down. She found an apartment above a dry goods store on Clement Street. 2 bedrooms, sloping floors, a kitchen window that looked out on someone's garden. The rent was cheaper than she had thought possible. Deb helped her move her boxes up the stairs and didn't ask questions beyond the practical ones, which was why Hannah had called her and not anyone else. "You don't have to explain anything," Deb said, sitting on the kitchen floor while Hannah unpacked mugs. "You're here. That's enough. I might need to borrow your couch for a week while I figure out the second bedroom. I have an actual guest room." "Right." Hannah set a mug down. "I forgot." "You've got a lot going on." "Yeah." It was the closest either of them got to discussing what had happened. Deb was not the kind of person who pushed. It was one of her better qualities. Hannah enrolled at the county health clinic under her mother's maiden name, Walsh. She wasn't hiding from Ryan, exactly. She told herself she wasn't hiding from Ryan. She was simply starting over under a name that had no history attached to it, no family drama woven into it, no associations she would have to explain. Hannah Walsh was a woman from out of state who had come to Millhaven for a teaching job. That was all. It was a clean story. She liked it. She got the job at Millhaven Elementary in February, 3 months before the twins were born. The principal, a tired and practical man named Gerald Osai, had interviewed her over the phone because she was still technically on bed rest for the tail end of a difficult first trimester and had offered her a second-grade position starting in the fall. "You'll be teaching 8 second graders," he told her. "We're a small school. Everyone knows everyone. That can be good or bad depending on your temperament." "I grew up in a big family," she said, which was true in the sense that it was factually accurate and misleading in every other sense. "I'm used to people knowing my business." "Good," he said, "because they will." Danchem. Noah came first at 4:37 in the morning with a full head of dark hair and a disposition that the delivery nurse described as very opinionated for someone who's been here 4 minutes. Emma arrived 11 minutes later, smaller and quieter, and looked immediately at Hannah's face as though she was taking notes. Hannah had not let herself think during the pregnancy about what it would feel like to see them. She had been too practical, too focused on logistics and finances and figuring out how to convert the second bedroom into something that could hold 2 cribs without feeling like a storage closet. She had not let herself be sentimental about it. She was not prepared for how it actually felt. She lay in the hospital bed with a baby on each side of her and understood, in the specific and irreversible way you understand things that change you, that she would do absolutely anything for them. It wasn't a dramatic feeling. It was quiet and total, like the moment when you realize the tide has come in and you weren't watching and now everything is different. She did not cry. She was too tired to cry. But she made them a promise, the same way you make a promise to yourself. Not out loud, not ceremonially, just in the space between one breath and the next, that she would not let them grow up in the chaos she had grown up in. She would not let them be managed and maneuvered and used as pieces in someone else's plan. Whatever she had to do to prevent that, she would do it. She did not call Margaret. She waited 3 weeks until she felt capable of handling the conversation without her voice giving her away, and then she called and said that she had moved away and started over, and that she was fine. She did not need anything. She was not interested in being found. She did not mention the babies. Her mother said, "You're being dramatic." Hannah said, "I'll call you at Christmas." She did not call it Christmas. Lily left a voicemail in January. Her voice sounded strange, too careful, like someone reading from a script they didn't quite believe. She said she hoped Hannah was well. She said she missed her. She said that if Hannah ever wanted to talk, she was there. Hannah listened to the message twice, then set her phone face down on the kitchen table and went to check on Noah, who had developed a cough and was sleeping badly. She did not call Lily back. The years move the way years do when you are busy enough not to watch them. In increments, you only notice from a distance. Noah, at 8 months, pulling himself upright against the coffee table with a look of pure determination on his face. Emma, at 1 year, solemn and watchful, learning to walk without any apparent interest in being celebrated for it. Noah, at 2, going through a phase where he was afraid of the vacuum cleaner and would only enter the kitchen if someone was holding his hand. Emma, at 3, telling Hannah with great seriousness that she had decided to be a scientist. "What kind of scientist?" Hannah asked. "The kind that figures things out," Emma said. Hannah had laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes from your chest, and she'd pulled Emma into her lap and held her there for a minute. These were not perfect years. She was tired in a way that became structural after a while, woven into the foundation of her days. Money was always tighter than she would have liked. She made mistakes with the kids, lost her temper over small things, was sometimes too rigid when she was scared, made decisions out of exhaustion that she second-guessed for weeks. She was one person doing what usually required two, and she knew it, and she managed it, and sometimes she didn't manage it, and that was that. She had one friend in Millhaven, Deb, who lived 20 minutes away and came to dinner once a week and was the person Hannah called when the twins had both been sick for 3 days and she was running on 4 hours of sleep and couldn't see how to get to the other side of it. She had colleagues at the school who were friendly, neighbors who waved, parents of her students who appreciated her in the specific way people appreciate teachers who actually pay attention to their children. She was part of the community in the way you become part of a small town if you show up consistently and don't cause trouble. She was not lonely in the way she had expected to be. She had thought she would miss Ryan. She did sometimes, in a way that she kept very carefully contained, a specific ache that she'd gotten good at not looking at directly, the way you learn not to look directly at something bright. But mostly what she felt in those years was a strange and stubborn satisfaction. She had built something. It was hers, and it worked, and she had done it with nothing but the determination not to fall apart. That counted for something. She let it count. She was putting the kids to bed on a Thursday when Noah said, "Marcus at school has a dad who came to field day." Hannah was in the middle of tucking Emma in. She didn't stop moving. "That's nice." "He was really loud," Noah said from across the room. "He kept cheering when Marcus didn't even win." "Parents do that." "Do we have a dad?" Emma was watching Hannah's face with the focused attention she brought to things she wasn't sure about. Hannah finished smoothing Emma's blanket and sat on the edge of the bed. "Yes," she said. "Everyone has a dad." "Where's ours?" Noah asked. "He doesn't live with us." "Does he know about us?" Hannah looked at her son. He was 5 years old and had Ryan's eyes, the particular shade of gray-green that she had spent a long time trying not to think about, and he was asking the question with the straightforward practicality he brought to most things, not from pain, just from wanting to know. "Not yet," she said. She kept her voice even. "That's something that might change someday." "Okay," Noah said, apparently satisfied, and rolled over and went to sleep. Emma looked at Hannah for another moment, measuring something, and then she said, "Will you tell us when it changes?" "Yes," Hannah said. "I will." She turned off the light and stood in the hallway for a moment with her back against the wall and let herself feel, briefly, the full weight of what she had said. Not yet. She had said not yet, which implied a someday, which meant she had, somewhere along the way, stopped closing the door on it entirely. She pushed off the wall and went to do the dishes. She didn't know then, standing at the sink on a Thursday night in Millhaven, Tennessee, with her 2 5-year-olds asleep down the hall, that 600 miles away in the city she had left, her sister Lily was sick in a way that neither Lily nor their mother was telling anyone about yet. She didn't know that Ryan Brooks had started asking questions about her 18 months ago, after finding an old photograph in a box he was clearing out, and that the questions had gotten sharper and more specific in recent weeks. She didn't know that a woman named Carla Mendez, who had been Margaret Carter's next-door neighbor for 12 years, had recently decided that she was tired of being the person who knew things and said nothing. She didn't know any of that. She washed the dishes and dried her hands on a kitchen towel and looked out the window at the garden below, which belonged to her neighbor Eleanor, who grew tomatoes and was not precious about sharing them. The night was quiet. Down the hall, the twins were breathing and sleeping and existing in the particular unconscious completeness of children who have enough and know it even if they can't name it. It was enough. She did not know yet that it was about to stop being enough on its own, that the world she had left behind was moving, with or without her, and that some of what it was moving toward was her, toward the door of this apartment on Clement Street, toward the woman she had made herself into, toward the quiet life she had built with such deliberate and careful hands. She did not know yet. She went to bed. The morning she walked into Gerald Osei's office and handed him the lesson plans for the substitute who would cover her class for 2 days while Emma had a tonsil procedure at the regional hospital, she didn't think about the city she'd left. She didn't think about Ryan. She thought about whether she'd remembered to pack Emma's yellow blanket in the hospital bag and whether Noah would be difficult with the babysitter or whether he'd decided, in the way he sometimes decided things at 5 years old with great finality, that he was old enough to manage. He had decided he was old enough. He was not, quite, but he managed anyway, which was very like him. The tonsil procedure went fine. Emma was furious about the IV. She expressed this by going completely silent and staring at the ceiling in a way that the attending nurse found more unsettling than crying. Hannah sat in the chair beside the hospital bed and held Emma's hand and said, "I know, it's uncomfortable and it's not fair and you're handling it really well." Emma looked at her. "You're just saying that. I'm saying it because it's true. You'd say it either way." "Probably," Hannah admitted, "but this time it's also true." Emma went back to staring at the ceiling, but her grip on Hannah's hand loosened slightly, which was its own kind of acceptance. They were home by Thursday afternoon. Emma spent Friday on the couch eating popsicles and watching nature documentaries with the concentrated intensity she brought to things she found genuinely interesting, and Noah sat next to her and pretended he was watching with her and actually fell asleep by 11 in the morning, which meant he had been more stressed about his sister than he'd let on. Hannah covered him with the blanket from the back of the couch and went to make lunch. These were ordinary days. She understood that they were ordinary. She had come to value ordinary with the particular appreciation of someone who had lived through enough disruption to know what it costs. She did not know that ordinary was almost over. The phone call came on a Monday. She was at school between third period and lunch, standing in the hallway outside her classroom while her second graders transitioned to art and making a mental note to email the parents of a boy named Cody who had been struggling with reading in a way that needed a conversation soon. The phone buzzed in her pocket. She looked at the screen and saw a number she didn't recognize, area code from back home. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. "Hannah." The voice was older than she remembered, slightly rougher. "This is Carla Mendez. I live next door to your mother. We met once at a cookout, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. You probably don't remember me." Hannah's chest went still. "I remember you." "I'm going to get right to it because I've been sitting on this for too long already. And it's not fair." Carla paused. "Your sister passed away last week. Lily. I'm sorry. She'd been sick for about 8 months, and your mother... I don't know what your mother told you or didn't tell you, but I thought you should know." Hannah stood in the hallway and said nothing. "Are you there?" "Yes." Her voice came out steady. She was not sure how that was possible. "I'm here. Thank you for telling me." "There's something else." Carla's voice dropped. "Ryan Brooks has been around. He came to see your mother about 2 weeks before Lily passed. I couldn't hear the whole conversation. I wasn't trying to listen. It just carries through my kitchen window. But he was asking about you, by name. He was asking where you were, whether you were all right. Your mother told him she didn't know." Hannah pressed her back against the wall. "That may or may not be true," Carla continued. "Knowing your mother the way I've come to know her over 12 years, I wouldn't stake much on it. I'm not telling you what to do. I just thought you should know what's moving in your direction." After they hung up, Hannah stood in the hallway until the bell rang and her second graders started coming back from art. And then she put the phone in her pocket and opened her classroom door and got through the rest of the day by not thinking about anything except the children in front of her. She was good at that. She had practiced it. So, she told Deb that night after the kids were in bed. They sat at Hannah's kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee that went cold while they talked, and Hannah told her everything. Not the sanitized version she'd gotten good at telling herself, where the decisions all made sense in sequence, but the actual version, the one with the gaps and the failures and the things she still could not justify, which was that she had never given Ryan the chance to tell her what had actually happened. Deb listened without interrupting. When Hannah finished, Deb said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." "You know he's going to find you." "Maybe." "Not maybe." Deb wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. If he's already asking your mother, he's going to keep asking, and your mother is going to be your mother about it, which means whatever she tells him or doesn't tell him is going to be whatever serves her, not you. So either you get ahead of it or you don't. Hannah looked at the table. Lily's gone. Yeah. I didn't get to say anything to her. Deb was quiet. I don't even know what I would have said. Hannah's voice was even. She was holding it even with the effort of someone holding a door shut against wind. I never figured out if she knew, if she was part of it, or if she was also just told a version of things. She was 24 when it happened. She was a kid. She was a grown adult who married the man her sister was with. It's more complicated than that. I know, Deb said. That's why I'm not telling you how to feel about it. I'm just saying she was also an adult. Hannah nodded. She didn't say anything else about Lily that night. There was too much she didn't know, and she had learned over the years to be careful with grief she couldn't fully account for. What she said eventually was, "The kids asked me once if they had a dad." What did you say? I said not yet. Deb looked at her across the table. How long ago was that? Few weeks. And what did they say? Emma asked if I'd tell them when it changed. Deb was quiet for a moment. Then she said, What did you tell her? I said yes. He came on a Thursday. She didn't know it was him at first. She was in her classroom after school, reorganizing the reading corner, because the reading corner had gradually accumulated an extra beanbag, a broken stapler, and 3 stuffed animals that no one would claim, and it needed to be sorted out. The school was mostly empty by 4 o'clock. The custodian was working down the hall. She could hear him humming. The knock at her classroom door was tentative enough that she thought it was a parent who'd gotten the wrong room. She looked up. Ryan Brooks was standing in the doorway of her 2nd grade classroom in Mill Haven, Tennessee, looking like he'd been driving for a long time and hadn't slept well and wasn't entirely sure he had the right address. She stood up from where she was kneeling by the beanbags. They looked at each other. She had thought, on the rare occasion she'd let herself think about this moment, that it would feel enormous, operatic somehow, a confrontation, a reckoning. All the things she'd said to him in her head over 5.5 years coming out in some clean, devastating sequence. What actually happened was that she said, How did you find me? And he said, Carla Mendez. She told you where I was? She told me the town. I found the school on my own. He stepped into the room, stopped, seemed to reconsider his position relative to the door. Hannah, He stopped, started again. I found out about Lily 3 weeks ago, and I asked your mother where you were, and she said she didn't know, and I wasn't sure I believed her. You were right not to. He absorbed that. His face did something she couldn't fully read. Not surprise exactly, but something that looked like confirmation of something he'd suspected and hadn't wanted confirmed. Can I sit down? He asked. There's chairs. She gestured at the tables. They were child-sized. He sat in one anyway, forearms on his knees, and she sat across from him in another one, and they were both too big for the furniture, and it should have been absurd, and it wasn't. I need to understand what happened, he said. I've been trying for a while. Your mother told me 6 years ago that you'd left with someone, that you'd made your choice and you didn't want me to contact you. And he shook his head. I was 29, and I'd just been told the woman I wanted to marry had left without a word. And your mother was there with this very calm and complete explanation, and you didn't push on it. No, I didn't. He met her eyes. That's on me. I know that. What did my mother tell you about Lily? About why you and Lily? She said Lily was struggling, that she needed someone steady, that Lily had always had feelings for me and she was fragile and your mother was worried about her and she'd been talking to me for months as a friend. And somewhere in those conversations, things shifted. He looked at his hands. I believed her because the shift felt real. Because Lily was there and you weren't. And I thought you'd chosen to leave, and I was trying to survive something, Hannah. I'm not saying that excuses anything. What did your relationship with Lily look like? The question came out steadier than she felt. He was quiet for a moment. It looked like 2 people who had settled. That's the honest answer. We were we were okay. There wasn't anything wrong, exactly, but there wasn't. He stopped. I don't want to say something about Lily that sounds like I'm using her death to make myself look better. Just tell me the truth. We were two people who had made a decision and were trying to make it work. She was a decent person. She was kind. I think she knew something was wrong and she didn't know what to do with it either. He paused. She asked me once, about a year in, whether I'd heard from you. I said no. She said she'd tried calling and you didn't call back. She didn't say it like an accusation. She said it like she was worried about you and didn't know what to do about the worry. Hannah looked at the wall above his head, at a banner her students had made in October that said second grade rocks in slightly uneven letters. What are you doing here, Ryan? I came to find out if you're all right. I'm all right. I can see that. He looked around the classroom. This is clearly... You've made something here. I can see that. He looked back at her. But I also have to tell you that I'm not just here because I was worried. I'm here because I couldn't keep not being here. Because it felt wrong for 5.5 years, and I kept telling myself I'd understood it wrong, and eventually I stopped being able to tell myself that. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I need to tell you something. His expression shifted, carefully neutral, the look of someone bracing. I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get all the way through it before you say anything. Can you do that? Yes. She told him about the pregnancy, about the drive north, about the health clinic, and the name Walsh, and the apartment on Clement Street. She told him about the night the technician turned the monitor and said there are 2 heartbeats, and the way she'd cried until she couldn't see properly. She told him about Noah arriving first with his opinions fully formed, and Emma arriving 11 minutes later, already studying the world with that watchful, assessing gaze. She told him she had 2 children, his children, that they were 5 years old and they were down the street at Deb's house right now because Hannah had asked Deb to pick them up from after-school care, because some part of her had understood, when Carla Mendez's number came up on her phone that Monday, that she was going to need an afternoon eventually that didn't have them in it. She talked for a long time. Ryan didn't say anything. He sat with his forearms on his knees and his eyes on her face, and he didn't say a word. When she finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough to have a shape. Then he said, What are their names? She told him. He sat back. He pressed one hand over his mouth and looked at the ceiling, and she watched something move through him that was too large for his face to hold, grief and shock, and something she couldn't name. Something that might have been, underneath everything else, the particular devastation of realizing you've missed something you couldn't have known you were missing. His eyes went wet. He didn't look away from the ceiling. He just sat there with his hand over his mouth and let it happen, which was the most honest thing she'd seen from another adult in longer than she could remember. Finally, he said, rough and quiet, I want to meet them. I know. Not tonight. I don't want to walk in cold and scare them. He lowered his hand, looked at her. Tell me how to do this right. Tell me what they need and I'll do it that way. She had not expected that. She had expected anger or pleading or that specific male variety of being injured that expresses itself as demand. She had made plans for those responses, the way you make plans. She had not made a plan for Ryan Brooks sitting in a child-sized chair in her classroom, asking her to tell him how to do this right. She said, They're cautious, Emma especially. She watches people before she decides how to feel about them. Noah is more open, but he'll follow Emma's lead on things that matter. Okay. You'd need to be patient. I can be patient. And I need to be honest with you, Ryan. I'm not interested in revisiting what we were. I'm not starting from where we left off. Whatever this is, it starts now, with who we are now, and there's no guarantee of what it becomes. He looked at her. I know that. I'm serious. I know you are. He held her gaze. So am I. She introduced him to the kids on Saturday morning. She had thought about it for 2 days and decided that the worst thing she could do was build it up. Turn it into an event, a revelation, something the children would sense the weight of before they even walked into the room. So she didn't build it up. She told them on Friday night that a friend of hers from a long time ago was going to come for coffee tomorrow, and that his name was Ryan, and that they didn't have to do anything except be themselves. Noah said, "Is he nice?" "I think so." "You think so?" "I haven't seen him in a while," Hannah said. "But yes, I think so." Emma said nothing. She went back to her book. Ryan arrived at 9:30 with 2 cups of coffee from the place on Clement Street. He had found it on his own, had apparently been staying at the one motel Millhaven had to offer, and had walked around the town the morning before, which struck Hannah as something she'd have to think about later. And a box of pastries from the same place that he set on the table, with the kind of practicality that said he understood food as a peace offering without making it seem calculated. Noah appeared immediately, drawn by the box. "What's in there?" he asked. "Pastries," Ryan said. "I didn't know what kind people liked, so I got a few different ones." Noah studied the box with great seriousness. "I like the ones with the sugar on top." "There are 2 of those." "How many people are here?" 4. "So there might be some negotiation." Noah looked up at him. "I'm good at negotiating," he said, which was not entirely true, but was the thing he believed about himself. And Ryan kept his face straight and said, "Good, because I might need backup." Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. She stood there in her socks and her Saturday clothes, which today were a pair of overalls and a striped shirt, and she looked at Ryan with that steady, measuring look she'd had since she was born. Ryan looked back at her. He didn't overdo it, didn't crouch down or put on a big smile, or do any of the things adults do when they're performing friendliness for children, and both parties know it. He just met her eyes and said, "Hi, you must be Emma." "How do you know my name?" she asked. "Your mom told me about you." "What did she say?" "She said you like to figure things out." Emma considered this, looked at her mother, then back at Ryan. "What kind of things do you like to figure out?" "Buildings, mostly. I'm an architect." "What's that?" "I design buildings. Figure out how they're put together. What they need to be strong." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's kind of like science." "It kind of is." She didn't smile, but she came the rest of the way into the kitchen, and she sat down at the table and she reached for the pastry box, bypassing the sugar ones entirely, leaving those for Noah. And she began to eat with the composed dignity she brought to most situations. It was not, Hannah thought, watching, nothing. It was, in fact, something. She poured herself a cup of the coffee Ryan had brought and sat down at her own table and let Saturday morning be what it was. Imperfect and tentative and real in the specific way that only things that haven't been planned all the way through can be real. Down the road, there were things she still hadn't figured out. There was her mother, who had been quiet for 5.5 years and would not remain quiet now that something was moving. There was the question of what to tell the children, and when, and how much truth was the right amount for 5-year-olds who were still building their own understanding of the world. There was the question of Ryan himself, who he was now, what he wanted, whether the man sitting at her kitchen table being carefully normal with her children was the same one she had loved, or someone new, or some combination of both. There was a great deal she didn't know. What she knew was the coffee was good, and the morning light came through the kitchen window, in the particular slanted way she had come to associate with days that turned out all right. And her 2 children were at the table with a man who was trying, quietly, without performance, the way you try when you know you don't have the right to ask for anything. And you're trying anyway. And she was not running. That was something. It was not nothing. Ryan didn't leave Millhaven that weekend. He had booked the motel room for 2 nights, which was what he'd told himself was reasonable. Come, find her, see if she'd talk to him, then figure out the next step from there. He had not made plans beyond that because making plans beyond that had seemed presumptuous, the kind of thinking ahead that assumed an outcome he hadn't earned the right to assume. But Sunday came and he was still there, and on Sunday afternoon he walked to the hardware store on the main street because he'd noticed, when Hannah let him in Saturday morning, that the hinge on her front door was loose in a way that would eventually become a problem, and he bought the right screws and a screwdriver and walked back to her apartment and knocked. She opened the door and looked at him, and then at the screwdriver. "Your front hinge," he said. She looked at the hinge, looked back at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She stepped back and let him in. It took him 8 minutes. Noah watched the entire process with the intensity of someone studying for an exam, handing Ryan screws when asked with great seriousness. And Emma sat on the couch and read her book and didn't look up, but also didn't leave the room, which Hannah had already learned to read as a form of interest. When he was done, Ryan sat back and tested the door twice and handed the screwdriver to Noah. "You can keep that," he said. "Every household needs one." Noah looked at the screwdriver like Ryan had handed him something significant. "We have one, Mohsen," he said, "but it's in the drawer and Mom says not to use it without asking." "That's a good rule." "I know, I just never get to ask." Ryan glanced at Hannah. She pressed her mouth flat to keep from smiling and said nothing. He stayed for another hour. They had lunch, grilled cheese, because it was what the kids wanted, and Hannah wasn't going to perform for an audience. And Ryan ate his without comment and talked to Noah about how buildings were held together, which Noah found fascinating in the way 5-year-olds find anything fascinating when it's explained to them like they're capable of understanding it. Emma ate her sandwich and listened. She didn't contribute to the conversation, but twice Hannah caught her watching Ryan with the expression she got when she was revising her assessment of something. After lunch, he said he should go, and he meant it. He wasn't angling to stay, wasn't pushing the afternoon into something it hadn't naturally become. He said goodbye to the kids, shook Noah's hand because Noah offered it with great formality, and told Emma it was nice to meet her, and Emma looked at him and said, "You can come back if you want." It was the first thing she'd said directly to him all weekend. Ryan said, "Thank you. I'd like that." After he left, Hannah stood at the kitchen sink and looked out the window at the garden below, and Deb's voice from 6 days ago played in her head. "If he's already asking your mother, he's going to keep asking." She had been right. He had come, and now he was staying in a motel in Millhaven, Tennessee, eating continental breakfast alone every morning, and her daughter had told him he could come back, and Hannah had no reliable map for what came next. She washed the lunch plates and tried to think clearly. The problem with thinking clearly about Ryan was that she'd had 5.5 years to construct a version of him that made her choices make sense, a version where leaving had been the only option, where the distance was necessary and justified and she didn't owe him anything. That version had served her well. It had gotten her through some genuinely hard years, but it required a Ryan who was uncomplicated in his wrongness, and the man who had sat at her kitchen table and listened to her children and asked to know how to do things right did not fit that version. She dried her hands, set the towel down. This was not going to be simple. She had known it wouldn't be simple. She had just hoped, in the small, dishonest way you hope for things you know aren't realistic, that it might be simpler than this. He extended the motel booking on Monday morning and called his office to say he was dealing with a family matter and would be remote for the week. His assistant, a methodical woman named Grace, who had worked for him for 4 years and had heard stranger things, said she'd reschedule his Thursday meeting and asked if he needed anything else. He said no. She didn't ask questions. He appreciated that. He walked the town in the mornings before the school day started, partly to get his bearings and partly because he was used to walking. It was how he thought, always had been, and he had a lot to think about. Millhaven was the kind of town that took about 40 minutes to walk entirely, which meant he covered it twice some mornings, circling back through the same blocks with the same houses and the same 2 dogs that barked at him from behind the same fence on Clement Street. He walked past Hannah's building every time, which he was aware was not an accident. He understood what he had done. Not just 6 years ago. The failure to push back on Margaret's version of events, the passive collapse into Lily, and the life that followed. But further back than that, the quality of attention he'd brought to the relationship with Hannah before it fell apart. He had loved her, genuinely, but he had also loved her in the slightly passive way of someone who assumed the good thing in his life would remain a good thing without being actively maintained. He had not thought enough about her family dynamics. He had not questioned enough. He had been 29 and things were good, and he had coasted on the goodness. He was not 29 anymore. He knew this did not fix anything. Understanding a failure clearly was not the same as repairing what the failure had broken, and he was not naive enough to think that showing up with a screwdriver and being decent to her children entitled him to anything. But he also knew that the 5.5 years he'd spent in a marriage that had never been quite right, years he had tried to make work, genuinely tried, and that had still never stopped feeling like something slightly off-key, had taught him the specific and unambiguous lesson of what it felt like to live beside the wrong choice. He was not here to ask her to make a different one. He was here because leaving again felt impossible. He went back to the motel and opened his laptop and worked until noon, and then he walked to the school at the end of the day and sat on a bench outside the front entrance and waited, because Hannah had texted him that morning, the first time she'd texted him, which meant she'd put his number in her phone, which he was careful not to assign too much weight to, and said that the kids got out at 3:15 and she usually walked them home. At 3:20, the front doors opened and children came out in the disordered and energetic way of people who have been sitting still all day. Noah came through the doors at a run, then stopped short when he saw Ryan. "You're here." "I'm here." "Why?" "Wanted to walk with you, if that's okay." Noah considered this with the brief seriousness he applied to decisions. "Okay," he said, "but I want to go past the hardware store because there's a thing in the window I want to look at." "What thing?" "It's a lock that's also a combination lock. I've been looking at it for 2 weeks." "We can look at it." Emma appeared behind her brother, backpack on both shoulders, the careful way she always wore it, and she looked at Ryan and didn't seem surprised. "Mom know you're here?" she asked. "She does." Emma nodded. That was apparently sufficient. Hannah came out 3 minutes later, keys in hand, and found Ryan sitting on the bench with Noah, explaining the combination lock in the hardware store window in detail, and Emma standing slightly apart, listening, not participating, but not excluding herself either. She stopped on the top step and watched them for a second before Ryan looked up. "Hope this is okay," he said. "It's fine." She came down the steps. "Noah, you don't need the combination lock." "I didn't say I needed it. I said I wanted to look at it." "There's a difference," Emma said, not unkindly. They walked home the long way because Noah wanted to go past the hardware store, and Ryan walked beside Hannah while the kids went ahead, and for a couple of blocks they didn't say anything, just walked. And it was strange how not strange it felt. Then Hannah said, "My mother called this morning." Ryan looked at her. "She wanted to know if I'd been in contact with you. She didn't say your name, she said him, like that was specific enough. I told her I wasn't going to discuss it." She paused. She hung up before I finished the sentence. "What do you think she wants?" "Control." Hannah said it without bitterness, just as fact. "She always wants control. She lost it when I left, and she's been fine with that as long as I stayed gone. But now something is moving, and she can feel it, and she doesn't like it. She lied to both of us." "I know." "Do you know why?" Hannah was quiet for a moment. "I've thought about it for 5 years. My best answer is that she didn't think I was the right choice for the life she'd imagined for Lily. Lily was her project. You understand? I was never her project. I was the one who managed things, who didn't require managing. Lily was the one she poured everything into. And I think when she saw that Lily wanted what I had, she decided the cleanest solution was to make sure Lily could have it." She looked ahead at the kids. "I don't think she thought about what it would do to me for more than about 30 seconds. That's—" Ryan stopped. "I don't have a word for that." "Neither do I, or I have several, but none of them feel adequate." They walked another half block. "She's going to be a problem," he said. "She's always been a problem. The question is what kind of problem and on what scale." Hannah glanced at him. "Do you still have contact with her? Since Lily—" "I called her when Lily was in the hospital. She was Margaret. She managed the situation. After Lily passed, she handled the arrangements and told me I was welcome to the service, and then went quiet." He paused. "I don't think she was grieving the way you'd expect. I think she was recalculating." Hannah nodded slowly. "That sounds right." They arrived at the hardware store. Noah pressed his face against the glass to look at the combination lock with an expression of pure longing. Emma stood next to him and peered in with more restrained curiosity. Ryan looked at the lock, then at Noah. "What would you put in it, if you had it?" Noah thought about this with complete seriousness. "My important things." "Like what?" "I have a box. It's got my best rocks in it and a card that Emma made me when I was sick and the screwdriver you gave me." Ryan was quiet for a second. "The screwdriver I gave you yesterday." "It's already important," Noah said simply. Hannah looked at the hardware store window and not at Ryan's face, which was good because she was not prepared for whatever was on it. He found a short-term rental by Wednesday, a furnished apartment on the other side of town that a local woman rented out when her college-age son wasn't using it. He moved out of the motel and into the apartment and set up his laptop on the kitchen table and started doing his actual job remotely, which was manageable with good internet and a lot of video calls. He told Hannah about the rental when he saw her Thursday morning at the coffee place on Clement Street, where they had established an informal habit of running into each other before her school day started. She looked at him over her cup. "You're staying?" "For now." "How long is for now?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "However long makes sense. I'm not going to pressure you. I want to be clear about that. If you tell me to dial back, I will. But I'd rather be here and figure it out than be 600 miles away guessing." She looked out the window. The main street was quiet at this hour, just the hardware store owner opening his gates and a couple of cars making the morning loop. "Noah asked me last night if you were going to be around," she said. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I thought so." She paused. Which was me making a decision I hadn't fully consciously made yet, apparently. "Do you want to unmake it?" "No." She said it without looking at him. "No, I don't. But I need you to understand something, Ryan. I'm not afraid of you. I don't have any illusions about you being a threat to me or the kids. That's not the issue. The issue is that my children are 5 years old and they've had a stable life, and they've never had anyone in it who matters and then leaves. I can't let that become something that happens to them." "I understand. I need to know you actually understand that, and it's not just something you're saying." He held her gaze. "I'm not going anywhere. That's not something I'm saying because it sounds right. I'm saying it because I've been trying for 5 years to live with the feeling that I let something real go, because I wasn't paying close enough attention, and I am done letting that be the story." She looked at him for a long moment, then she looked back out the window. "Okay," she said. It was not an embrace, it was not a resolution, it was just okay. The particular kind of okay that means I'm choosing to believe you, and the choosing is its own kind of act. The phone call from Margaret came on a Friday, 3 weeks after Ryan arrived. Hannah was in her classroom after hours, the same position Ryan had found her in that first afternoon. Except this time, she was sitting at her desk going through parent emails and eating a sandwich she'd forgotten to eat at lunch. Her phone lit up with her mother's number, and she looked at it for 2 full rings before she answered. "I know where you are," Margaret said. No greeting. "I know you do. And I know he's there." "I know that too." A pause. Margaret did not like it when the person she was talking to was already several steps ahead of her. It disrupted her rhythm. "This is a mistake, Hannah. Whatever you think you're doing, this is a mistake." "Mom, he's not stable. You don't know what he was like after you left. You have no idea what Lily went through." "I know what I went through," Hannah said and kept her voice level. "And I know what you did." The silence that followed had texture to it, a specific kind of stillness that Margaret used when she was deciding which angle to come from next. "I did what was best for this family," she said finally. "You did what was best for Lily. Lily was vulnerable. You were always the strong one. I knew you'd be fine." Hannah set down her sandwich. "That's a terrible thing to say to someone." "It's true. It's terrible because it's true." Hannah's voice came out even, which surprised her. She had imagined this conversation going differently, louder, more ragged. She had imagined herself losing control of it. But she was 36 years old, and she had spent 5 years building something with the particular patience of someone who has learned not to collapse under pressure. And she was, it turned out, calmer in this moment than she'd expected. "You decided I didn't need protecting. You decided my feelings were secondary. You lied to me, and you lied to Ryan, and you took 5 years from us and from our children, and now you're calling me to tell me I'm making a mistake." "You have children?" Margaret's voice changed. Hannah closed her eyes briefly. She had not meant to say that, or she had, somewhere, chosen to say it before she consciously caught up to the choice. "Yes," she said. The silence stretched. "How old?" "5." A longer silence. Hannah waited. "His?" Margaret said. "Yes." She heard her mother breathing on the other end of the line, measured, controlled, but with something underneath it that Hannah couldn't entirely name. Not guilt. Her mother did not do guilt in any straightforward way, but something adjacent to it, perhaps, or something that would have been guilt in a different person. "I'd like to meet them," Margaret said. No. The word came out before she thought it, which meant it had been decided already at some level she hadn't been consulting. Not now, maybe not for a long time. You don't get to walk into their lives and be their grandmother as though nothing happened. Hannah, I said no. And if you push this, if you try to come here or contact Ryan or do anything that disrupts what we're building, I will make sure you have no access at all. I mean that. You can't keep my grandchildren from me. I can do whatever I need to do to protect them. Hannah stood up because sitting felt wrong now. I'm going to go, Mom. I'll call you when I have something useful to say. She hung up before Margaret could respond. She stood in the empty classroom with her phone in her hand, and she was shaking, which was the body's response to adrenaline and had nothing to do with whether she'd handled it right. She had handled it right. She knew she had. But knowing it didn't stop the shaking. She called Ryan. He picked up on the second ring. Hey! She called me. Hannah sat back down. My mother. She knows about the kids now. I told her without meaning to, or meaning to without knowing it. She said she wants to meet them. What did you say? I said no. Good. She's going to push back. Yeah, Ryan said. I know. A pause. Are you okay? I'm shaking, but I'm fine. It's just adrenaline. Where are you? Still at school? I can come. No. She paused. Not yet. I needed to tell someone. I needed it to be out loud. Okay. His voice was steady. Not artificially calm, not performing steadiness, just actually steady, the way people are when they've decided how they feel about a situation. Take whatever time you need. I'm here. She sat with the phone against her ear for a moment without saying anything. She said she did what was best for the family, Hannah said. When I told her what she'd done, she said she did what was best. I know. She believed it, Ryan. That's the part I keep getting stuck on. She wasn't lying about believing it. People can believe something and still be wrong. I know. Hannah looked at the banner on the wall. Second grade rocks in her students' slightly uneven letters. I know that. I don't know what to do with it. Whether it makes it better or worse, that she wasn't doing it out of malice exactly, just out of the particular blindness of someone who decided one daughter mattered more than the other and never questioned the decision. Ryan was quiet for a moment. I think that might be something you figure out over a long time. Not today. Probably. Hannah, for what it's worth, and I know it doesn't fix anything, I should have pushed back on her version. When she told me you'd left with someone, I should have called you directly and I didn't. And that's something I have to live with. You were 29 and you'd just been told the woman you loved had walked out. Still. Yeah, she said. Still. A pause. But we're here now. We are. She picked up the other half of her sandwich from the desk. I'm going to finish my lunch. Okay. Thank you for picking up. Always, he said, and then seemed to hear how that sounded, and added with a somewhat rueful note. Or, available, in reasonable hours. She almost laughed. Good night, Ryan. Good night, Pat. She told the kids on a Sunday. She had been thinking about when and how for 2 weeks, and she'd talked it through with Deb one evening while the kids were in bed, going back and forth about age appropriate and how much detail and what order to say things in. Deb, who was practical about most things, said, They're 5. Tell them the truth in the simplest possible version and let them ask questions. What if they ask questions I can't answer? Tell them you can't answer yet. They know you're not perfect. They've been watching you figure things out their whole lives. So on Sunday morning, while the 3 of them were eating breakfast, eggs, which Noah had recently decided were his favorite food, and ate with a conviction that suggested he might someday be a person with very strong opinions about brunch, Hannah set down her fork and said, I want to talk to you both about something. Noah kept eating. Emma put her fork down. Ryan is your dad, Hannah said. I know I've said we'd talk about that someday. This is that someday. Noah stopped eating. Emma looked at Hannah, then at the table, then at her hands. Why didn't he know us before? Noah asked. His voice was careful in a way it wasn't always. Because of a complicated situation that happened before you were born. It wasn't because he didn't want you. He didn't know about you. How did he not know? I made choices that were hard, and they were the choices I could make at the time. She kept her voice even. I can't explain all of it right now because some of it involves adult things that I'll tell you when you're older. But I want you to know that nothing that happened was because you weren't wanted. You were always wanted. Emma said, Does he know now? Yes. Is that why he's here? That's part of why. Emma picked up her fork again. She ate a bite of egg. She was thinking, and Hannah let her think. Noah said, Can I still keep the screwdriver? Yes, Noah. Okay. He went back to eating with a return to his normal pace that suggested either resilience or the 5-year-old version of emotional processing, which sometimes looked indistinguishable. Does he know I have it? He gave it to you. I mean, does he know I kept it? I think he assumed. Noah nodded, apparently satisfied. Emma said, Is he going to live with us? No, he has his own place here in town. But he's staying in town. Yes. Emma looked up. Her face had the particular quality it got when she was about to say something she'd been working toward for a while. I already figured it out, she said, when he came the first time. He looks like Noah. Hannah looked at her daughter. Not exactly, Emma continued, with the care of someone making an accurate rather than impressive statement. But enough. You didn't say anything. I was waiting to see what you'd say. Emma picked up her juice glass. I didn't want to be wrong. Hannah sat back in her chair. She looked at her 2 children. Noah eating eggs with the appetite of someone who had filed the information and would return to it later. Emma sitting with the composed precision of a person who has already done most of the work of adjusting. And she felt, not for the first time, that she had somehow produced 2 people who were substantially more capable than she'd expected, and that this was both comforting and slightly humbling. Any other questions? She asked. Can he come to field day? Noah asked. That's in April. That's a yes? That's a not yet decided. Okay. He pointed at her plate. Are you going to eat that? Ryan came for dinner the following Tuesday. Not a planned dinner, not a production. Hannah had been making pasta when he texted asking if she needed anything from the store, and she'd texted back that she was out of bread and he'd arrive 20 minutes later with bread and a block of Parmesan because he'd made an executive decision, and then he was just there, in the kitchen, and she'd set another place at the table without deciding to, the way you do things you've already decided somewhere below the level of conscious thought. Noah told him about field day, extensively. Ryan listened with the full attention he gave the kids, which was, Hannah had noticed, different from the attention he gave adults. More complete, less divided, as though he understood that children can tell when you're only halfway there. Our class is doing the relay race, Noah said. I'm fast. Emma is also fast, but she doesn't like running. I like running, Emma said. I don't like performing running. That's the same thing. It really isn't. Ryan looked at Emma. What's the difference? Emma considered how to explain it. Running because you need to get somewhere is fine. Running while people watch and decide if you're good enough is different. That's a pretty sophisticated distinction for someone who just turned 6. I'm 5. You turned 6 last week, Noah said. Both of us. Ryan looked at Hannah, briefly, and she recognized in his expression the particular ache of someone calculating what they'd missed without meaning to make it anyone else's problem. Happy belated birthday, he said to Emma. Emma looked at him. You didn't know. No, I didn't. That's okay, she said, and her voice was not generosity exactly and not coldness either, just the honest acknowledgement of a fact. It was okay. Not in the sense that it didn't matter, but in the sense that it was real, and she had decided to accept real things. After dinner, Ryan helped Hannah with the dishes while the kids watched their 30 minutes of television in the next room, and they stood at the sink and did it the way people do things when they've spent time together long enough that the ordinary tasks have stopped being charged and become just tasks. Emma knew, Hannah said. What? She said she figured it out when you first came, that you looked like Noah. She handed him a wet pan to dry. She was waiting to see what I'd say. He was quiet for a moment. She's something. She really is. Noah is too, just differently. Yeah. Hannah turned the faucet off. He's got your instinct for just accepting information and moving forward. Emma processes in private and then comes out with the final product. Ryan dried the pan. I didn't know you'd analyzed my personality that specifically. It's hard not to notice when you're looking for it in someone else. She took the pan from him and put it away. You're all right with them, Ryan. I want you to know I see that. They're easy to be all right with. They're also 5. They can be deeply difficult. I know. I'm not under any illusions. He folded the dish towel. I know I'm getting the introduction, the part where everyone's on reasonable behavior. I know there's going to be harder stuff. Definitely. I'd like to be here for that too. She looked at him. I know you would. A pause. My mother is going to make things difficult. I know that too. I don't know yet what form it takes, but she's not going to let this go without... She doesn't let things go. Hannah leaned against the counter. She's going to say she has rights, as a grandmother, and I don't know enough about family law to know how much weight that carries. Ryan was quiet for a moment. I have a lawyer, he said carefully. I've worked with her on a contract dispute, but she knows family law. I could ask her, discreetly, what the landscape looks like. I'm not ready to lawyer up. I know. I'm not saying do it. I'm saying have information. He met her eyes. Being prepared isn't the same as starting a fight. She thought about it. Ask her hypothetically. Don't tell her anything specific yet. Okay? From the living room, Noah's voice. Mom, can we have more time? The show's not over. 2 more minutes, she called back. That's not enough. That's what I've got. A pause. Okay, Noah said, in the tone of someone making a significant concession. Ryan smiled, which was a real smile, the kind that wasn't performing anything. Hannah looked at it, and then looked away and went to tell the kids it was time to start getting ready for bed. And she was careful not to think too precisely about what she was feeling because she'd learned over 5.5 years that some things were better approached from the side rather than straight on. She would get there. Not tonight, not in any clean way. But she was no longer walking away from it, and that, for now, was enough to build on. The lawyer's name was Sandra Okafor. No relation to Deb, though Hannah made the connection immediately and found it faintly absurd, the way coincidences in small, contained lives tend to stack up. Ryan had called her on a Wednesday and framed it as hypothetical, and Sandra had been professional and efficient and had told him to have the actual person call her when they were ready, because hypotheticals only went so far. Hannah called her on a Thursday evening, after the kids were in bed, sitting at her kitchen table with a notepad she ended up not writing anything on. Sandra asked clean, direct questions, and Hannah answered them. When Hannah finished, Sandra was quiet for a moment and then said, Here's the short version. Grandparent visitation rights exist in Tennessee, but the threshold to establish them is not low. Courts look at whether there's a significant existing relationship with the child, whether denial of contact would harm the child, and yes, critically, whether the parents object. Both parents objecting is a strong position. A pause. Does the father object? Yes, Hannah said. Clearly. Then you're in a stronger position than you might think. I'd want to know more about the specifics before I told you not to worry, because I don't tell people not to worry until I have reason to. But based on what you've described, your mother has never met these children, has had no relationship with them, and both parents are present and in agreement. She'd be working uphill. She has resources, Hannah said. She's not without money or the willingness to use it. Understood. Resources matter, but they're not everything. Sandra's voice was measured. My advice right now is to document. Write down everything, the phone calls, what was said, the dates. Don't engage with her more than necessary, and when you do engage, keep it short and don't make promises. If she escalates, call me. After they hung up, Hannah sat with the notepad in front of her and wrote the date of her mother's first call, then the second, then the content of each in plain factual sentences. She wrote for about 15 minutes. Then she put the notepad in the drawer of her bedside table, which seemed like the right place for things that needed to be close but not visible. She lay in the dark for a while and thought about the word document, the particular coldness of it, turning your mother into a paper trail. She thought about whether she felt guilty about that and concluded that she felt something, but it wasn't guilt exactly. It was more like grief for the relationship that had never quite existed. The mother who should have been there and hadn't been, the whole long history of choosing to manage Hannah instead of know her. She turned over and went to sleep. November came with the particular gray determination of Tennessee autumns, the hills going rust and copper and then bare. The mornings getting cold enough that the kids needed their heavier jackets. Noah lost his jacket on a Tuesday and found it on Thursday in the lost and found at school, which he reported to Hannah with the satisfaction of someone who had solved a significant problem entirely on his own. Emma kept her jacket on a hook by the door and had never lost anything in her life, which Noah periodically found aggravating. Ryan came to the apartment for dinner twice a week, sometimes 3 times, and helped with bedtime when Hannah let him, which was more often than she'd expected herself to. He was good at it, not in a performing competence way, but in the way of someone who had paid attention to what the kids actually needed. Noah needed the bedtime routine to be consistent and predictable, same order every time, and got anxious when it wasn't. Emma needed a few minutes of quiet where no one asked her anything, just existing in the same space before she was ready to sleep. Ryan had worked this out within 2 weeks without Hannah telling him. She noticed that he noticed things. It was not a small thing to notice. On a Wednesday evening in mid-November, after both kids were down and Hannah was finishing the last of a glass of wine at the kitchen table, Ryan said from across the table, "I want to tell you something, and I don't want it to land wrong." She looked up. "Okay. I've been talking to my firm about restructuring. There's a possibility of opening a satellite office. They've been thinking about the Nashville corridor for a while, client base expanding down here. I told my managing partner I might be interested in leading it." Hannah set her glass down. "That would be permanent," she said. "Yes. You'd be here, in this region, indefinitely." "That's the idea." He held her gaze. "I want to be clear about something. This is not me making a move on you. This is not me manufacturing proximity and calling it something else. This decision is about Noah and Emma, full stop. Whatever happens between you and me, whatever that looks like, however it develops or doesn't, I want to be their father, actually present, not 600 miles away in a phone call on weekends." He paused. "But I'm also not going to do something that disrupts your life without telling you first. So I'm telling you." Hannah looked at the table, then at the window, then at him. "You've already decided," she said. "I've decided I want to do it. I haven't signed anything." "But you've decided." "Yeah." He didn't look away from her. "I have." She picked up her glass again, took a slow sip. "Do you know what the hardest part of the last 5 years was? Not the money, not the exhaustion, not doing it alone. The hardest part was knowing that I was making all the decisions, every single one, and that if I got something wrong, there was no one to catch it. Not the decisions about the kids, those I could manage. The decisions about what kind of people they'd be able to count on. Those were the ones that kept me up." Ryan was quiet. "I protected them," she said. "I protected them really carefully. I was very intentional about who I let in. Deb, a couple of colleagues at school, nobody who might leave." She set the glass down. "And now you're telling me you're going to be here, and I believe you mean it. And that should be simple. It's not simple. Because if you believe me and you're wrong, the damage is worse." "Yes." "I know." He turned the coffee mug in his hands. "I don't know how to prove it in advance. I don't think there's a way to do that. I can only be here consistently until being here is just what I do, not a thing I have to prove." "That's the answer I knew you'd give." "Is it the wrong one?" She looked at him for a long moment. "No, it's the only real one," she exhaled. "Tell your managing partner yes." He held her gaze. "Yeah?" "Tell them yes." He nodded once, didn't overdo the response, which she appreciated, just nodded and looked at his coffee and said, "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just do it." "Right. She stood up to put her glass in the sink, and as she passed the table, she put her hand on his shoulder. Briefly, just for a second, the kind of touch that isn't making a declaration but isn't nothing either. And then she was at the sink with her back to him, running the water. Behind her, Ryan sat very still. Neither of them said anything else, and it was the right call. Deb came for dinner on Friday, as she usually did, and after the kids went to bed, she sat across from Hannah and said, "You look different." "I look tired." "You always look tired. This is a different kind of different." Deb poured herself more wine. "Are you sleeping?" "More or less." "More or less means less." "It means variable." Hannah pulled her feet up onto the chair. "My mother sent a card." Deb raised her eyebrows. "To the apartment. Which means she has the address, which she's had for a while probably. She just hasn't used it before now." Hannah picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. The card was addressed to the children. It had their names on it, Noah and Emma Carter. Carter. Not Walsh. Carter. My name. Which means she's done some research and she knows what name I've been using, and she knows enough. She looked up. There was no note inside, just a card with a bird on it, like a seasonal card, and their names written on the front in her handwriting. "That's a message," Deb said. "It's several messages. I know where you are, I know their names, I know what they're called, and I haven't done anything yet." Hannah's voice was even. "She's establishing a perimeter." "What are you going to do?" "Nothing yet. Sandra said don't engage more than necessary, so I'm not engaging." She pulled the thread free from her sleeve and looked at it. "But I've been thinking about the letters." Deb looked at her. "Carla Mendez called me 8 months ago," Hannah said. "She told me Ryan had been asking about me. And when I was at the apartment, the old one, when I went back to get my things, I took some things from the house. Old things. From a drawer in the hallway table that my mother kept locked, but the key was always on top of the door frame." She paused. "I took 2 letters. I wasn't thinking clearly about why I was taking them. I just took them." "What letters?" "One is from my mother to Lily, dated about a month before Ryan and I fell apart. It talks about Ryan. It talks about how Lily has always wanted what Hannah has, and how this time Margaret is going to make sure Lily gets it. Those are close to the exact words." Hannah looked at the table. "The other one is a draft. I don't think it was ever sent. It's from my mother to Ryan. Same time frame. And it's the beginning of the story she was going to tell him, about me leaving with someone. She practiced it in writing before she made the call." Deb set her glass down. "I've had them for 5.5 years, Hannah said, in a box in the top of my closet. I took them because something in me understood they were important, and then I never did anything with them because I wasn't ready to open that back up." "You need to show Ryan." "I know." "And Sandra." "I know." Hannah looked up. "I've been carrying them for 5 years, and I've been telling myself it was because I wasn't ready. And that was true for a while, but now I think I'm also scared of what it does. What it does to Ryan when he sees his name on that draft letter. What it does to both of us to have it be that concrete." "It was already concrete," Deb said, not unkindly. "The letters just make it visible." "Yeah." "Hannah," Deb leaned forward, "you've been protecting yourself. That's not a flaw. But you have a lawyer telling you to document, and you have a mother circling, and you have 2 letters in a box in your closet that are exactly the kind of thing lawyers mean when they say document. You don't get to keep those to yourself anymore. Not because of Ryan, not because of the case, because you built all of this on the truth, and the truth has to go all the way." Hannah was quiet for a long time. "I know," she said finally. "I know." She showed Ryan the letters on a Saturday morning when the kids were at a birthday party for one of Noah's school friends, and she had 2 hours of an empty apartment. She'd put them on the kitchen table before he arrived, the 2 envelopes side by side, and when he came in and saw them, he stopped in the doorway and looked at her face first, reading her expression before looking at what was on the table, which was the right instinct in the right order. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She told him what they were before he opened them, because she thought he deserved that. Then she let him read. He read the first one slowly. She watched his face and saw him do what she'd done when she first read it. The brief stillness when the meaning lands, then the adjustment, then the rereading to make sure he'd understood correctly. He set it down and picked up the second one. This one he read faster, and his jaw tightened about halfway through, and by the time he set it down, he was looking at the table with a focused quiet that she recognized as the look of someone containing something large. "She wrote it out," he said. "Yes." "She practiced it." "Yes." He sat back, put one hand over his mouth, looked at the ceiling briefly, then back at the letters. "Hannah, she drafted the phone call she was going to make to me." His voice was controlled, very deliberate, like it was a project. "I know. How long have you had these?" "Since I left." He looked at her. "I wasn't in a state to think clearly about why I was taking them," she said. "I just took them." "You've had proof of what she did for 5 years." "Yes." She held his gaze. "I wasn't ready to use it. I know how that sounds." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said with effort, "It doesn't sound like anything except someone who is trying to survive." He looked at the letters again. "We need to get these to Sandra." "I know." "Originals. She'll want originals." "I made copies. The originals are in the box." He nodded. He was still looking at the letter on the table, the draft, the one with his name worked into the practice story. She could see him working through it, the particular internal labor of adjusting your understanding of something you thought you already understood. "She must have known," he said. "Some part of her must have known there was a chance this would come out someday. And she did it anyway." "She thought I'd stay gone," Hannah said. "She thought she'd managed it cleanly enough that it would just be the way things were. And if Lily hadn't—" He stopped. "If Lily hadn't gotten sick, if Carla hadn't called me, if you hadn't started asking questions." Hannah folded her hands on the table. "A lot of ifs. But they happened." Ryan looked at her. "I want to be angry," he said. "I am angry. But I'm also sitting here thinking about what it must have been like for you to leave the way you did, pregnant, alone, not telling anyone, and knowing that somewhere in your closet was the proof that none of it had to happen that way." His voice was careful. "That must have been a very specific kind of weight to carry." She looked at the letters. "I couldn't look at them for the first 2 years. I knew they were in the box, and I couldn't. And then when I could look at them, I'd already made something. The apartment, and the job, and the kids, and this whole life. And opening it back up felt like it would break something. Did it?" She considered the question honestly. "No," she said. "It didn't break anything. It just made things more complicated." "Complicated isn't broken." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He gathered the letters carefully and stacked them and slid them back into their envelopes. "I'll call Sandra Monday. Will you come with me?" "Yes." He set the envelopes down. "Hannah." She looked at him. "I need to say something, and I need you to let me say it without making it mean more than I'm saying it to mean, okay?" She waited. "I'm sorry I didn't push back. When she told me you'd left. I'm sorry I wasn't someone who pushed back on that, who said I need to hear this from Hannah directly." He held her gaze. "I've said it before. I mean it more now, looking at that letter. Because she was able to do what she did partly because I wasn't the kind of person who questioned her account of you, and you deserved someone who would have." Hannah looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said, "and I wasn't someone who called you when I should have, so we both have that." She paused. "We're building something different now. That's what matters." He nodded. From outside the window came the sound of Eleanor's wind chimes, the ones on the corner of her garden that rang whenever the weather shifted. The sound was small and clear and very ordinary. "Are you hungry?" Hannah asked. "I haven't eaten." "Yeah," Ryan said. "I could eat." She got up and opened the refrigerator, and the kitchen filled with the ordinary noise of a meal being made, and the letters sat on the table in their envelopes, and outside the weather was shifting toward something colder, and down the street her children were at a birthday party eating cake and being 5 years old in the loud, full way of children who have never known they were at the center of anything except their own lives. She was going to have to fight for this. She had known it since her mother's name appeared on her phone. She had known it since the card with no note arrived with her children's names in Margaret's handwriting. She had known it the way you know things that you aren't ready to face yet, but that wait for you patiently, settled in the knowledge that you will get there. She was there. Whatever came next, she was not leaving again. She had built something here, with her own hands, in her own time, out of nothing but the decision to keep going, and she was going to stand in front of it. Whatever her mother sent their way, Hannah Carter was going to be exactly where she was. Sandra had told her to wear something plain, not because appearances decided cases, she'd said, but because the story they were telling was about a woman who had built something ordinary and solid out of difficult circumstances, and ordinary and solid had a look. Hannah wore a dark blue blouse and gray pants and flat shoes, and she stood in the bathroom mirror on the morning of February 14th and looked at herself for a moment and thought, "This is what I am. This is all I'm bringing in there. Whatever that's worth, it's going to have to be enough." Deb watched the kids. Hannah had told them she had an important meeting for work. Noah had accepted this. Emma had looked at her with the measuring gaze and said, "Is everything okay?" And Hannah had said, "It's going to be," which was the most honest thing she could offer. And Emma had nodded and gone back to her book, and Hannah had understood, not for the first time, that her daughter already carried more awareness of the adult world than she let on. The drive to Nashville was 40 minutes. Ryan drove. They didn't talk much. The radio was on low, and neither of them turned it up or off, just let it be background. And Hannah watched the winter fields go past the window and tried to keep her breathing even. She had gone through her testimony with Sandra 4 times. She knew what she would say and what she would not say and where she would look when she said it. She had practiced not letting her face do things when Douglas Marsh said things that were designed to make her face do things. She had practiced all of it. None of the practice made the morning feel less like standing at the edge of something. "You okay?" Ryan said, somewhere around the 20-minute mark. "Working on it." "That's enough." She looked at the road ahead. "What did Paul tell you? For your testimony? Tell the truth. Don't volunteer. Don't get drawn into arguments about the past. Answer what's asked." He paused. "He also told me that if Marsh tries to use the fact that I didn't know about the kids as evidence of Hannah's character, I should be very clear about whose decision that was and whose it wasn't." Meaning my mother's. Meaning everything that happened because of a set of lies that started with your mother and radiated outward, and I'm not going to sit in a witness chair and let her attorney imply otherwise. Hannah looked at him. "Don't get angry in there." "I know." "I mean it. The moment you get angry, it becomes about your feelings and not about the facts." "I know, Hannah." His voice was controlled. "I've got it." She looked back at the road. "I know you've got it. You're nervous. It's fine. Tell me what else to do." She thought about it. "Nothing. Just be exactly what you are." He was quiet for a moment. "I can do that." The family court building in Nashville was the kind of building designed to feel neutral and managed to feel merely cold. Beige hallways, fluorescent lighting, the specific smell of institutional carpet and old paper. Sandra was waiting in the lobby with her briefcase and a coffee she handed to Hannah without asking, which was the right instinct. Paul Draper was already upstairs, Sandra said. He'd arrived early to review the exhibit list with the clerk. The hearing was in courtroom 4, Judge Eleanor Marsh presiding, scheduled for 9 o'clock. It was 8:47. They took the elevator. In the elevator, Hannah noticed that her hands were steady and her chest was tight, and that these were 2 different systems of her body responding to the same situation with different information, and she let both of them be true at the same time. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected. 6 rows of gallery seating, mostly empty at this hour. The judge's bench at the front, a clerk's table to the side, 2 counsel tables facing forward. Douglas Marsh was already at the petitioner's table, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and the comfortable posture of someone who had been in rooms like this for a long time. He looked up when they entered, assessed the situation with the rapid efficiency of opposing counsel, and returned to his papers. Margaret was seated behind him in the gallery. Hannah saw her before she sat down. She had not seen her mother in 5.5 years, and the thing that struck her first was how much the same she looked. champagne-adjacent clothing, hair precisely arranged, the particular set of her shoulders that communicated composure as a statement of intent. She was 63 years old, and she looked like someone who had never in her life allowed herself to appear uncertain. Their eyes met. Margaret held the look. Hannah looked away first, not from weakness, but because she had decided in Sandra's office the week before that she was not going to perform for her mother today. She was going to perform for the judge, and the judge was the only person in this room whose reading of the situation mattered. She sat down next to Sandra. Ryan sat beside her. Paul Draper came in from a side door and nodded at them both and took his seat. At 9 o'clock exactly, the clerk called the room to order and Judge Eleanor Marsh came in. She was in her mid-60s, compact and unhurried, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the look of someone who had seen most varieties of human behavior and had a settled opinion of most of them. She sat, scanned the room, and opened the file in front of her. "Carter versus Walsh," she said. "Grandparent visitation petition." She looked up. "Is the petitioner present?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marsh said, rising. "Is the respondent present?" "Yes," Sandra said. "Then let's begin." Marsh went first. He was good. Hannah had expected him to be good, but sitting and listening to it was different from being warned about it. He presented Margaret's position with the measured sincerity of someone who had learned that juries and judges alike respond to calm more than to passion, and his narrative was clean. A grandmother who had lost her daughter, who had grandchildren she had never met, who was seeking only the basic connection that family deserved. He spoke about Hannah's departure with careful language, not accusations, just facts, the way you can make facts sound like accusations by the order in which you place them. He said that Ryan Brooks had been denied knowledge of his own children for 5 years. He did not say Hannah had done this maliciously. He simply placed the fact in the room and let it sit. Hannah kept her face neutral. She had practiced this. Then Sandra stood up. Sandra's opening was shorter and more precise. She said that the petitioner had no established relationship with the children, had never met them, and had no demonstrated history of acting in their interest. She said that the documentation would show a pattern of behavior on the petitioner's part that had directly caused the circumstances she was now using as the basis of her petition. She said the case was, at its core, straightforward. A parent asking the court to recognize her right to protect her children from someone who had already demonstrated she would manipulate family relationships for her own purposes. She sat down. Margaret, in the gallery, was very still. But Carla Mendez testified first. She had driven up from the city that morning, a 3-hour drive, and she sat in the witness chair with the squared-off composure of a woman in her late 60s who had decided to stop keeping other people's secrets and was at peace with that decision. She wore a blue blazer and kept her hands folded in her lap and answered Sandra's questions in clear, complete sentences. She testified to 12 years of proximity to the Carter household. She testified to her general observations of Margaret's management of family dynamics. Then Sandra asked her about the specific evening she believed Margaret made the phone call to Ryan Brooks. "It was a Thursday," Carla said. "The neighborhood association had a meeting that night, and I left early because my back was bothering me. I came home around 7:30. My kitchen window faces the Carter driveway, and the window was open because the weather was still warm. I could hear Margaret Carter on her phone in the driveway." "Could you hear the conversation?" "Parts of it. She was walking back and forth, which is what she did when she was on the phone with something important. I heard her say something about Hannah making a choice, and then I heard her say that she thought Ryan deserved to know." Carla paused. The tone was, it wasn't a difficult conversation. It was the tone of someone completing a task they'd already decided to complete. "Can you approximate the date?" "The neighborhood association met on the second Thursday of the month. I can confirm the meeting date from the minutes, which I still have copies of. It was September 11th that year." Sandra introduced the meeting minutes as an exhibit. Marsh objected on foundation grounds. Judge Marsh overruled him without looking up from the exhibit. Then Marsh cross-examined. He was careful and methodical. He asked Carla whether she was certain of what she'd heard, whether she'd been standing at the window deliberately, whether she had any personal relationship with Hannah that might affect her account. Carla answered each question without agitation. She said she had not been standing at the window deliberately. She said she had heard what she'd heard. She said her relationship with Hannah was that of a neighbor who had met her once at a cookout and called her 5.5 years later because she felt it was right. You felt it was right, Marsh repeated. Yes. Not because Hannah Carter asked you to call her? Hannah Carter didn't know I existed until I called her. Marsh moved on. Hannah testified after lunch. She sat in the witness chair and looked at Sandra and answered the questions in the order they had practiced. She talked about the relationship with Ryan, about the phone call from her mother, about the version of events she'd been given and why she had believed it. She talked about leaving and why she had left and what she had intended. She talked about building a life in Millhaven. She talked about what the children had and what they needed and what she had spent 5 years providing. Then Sandra asked her about the letters. Hannah described finding them, the drawer in the hallway table, the key on top of the doorframe. Sandra introduced both letters as exhibits. She asked Hannah to confirm that they were in her mother's handwriting. Hannah confirmed it. Sandra asked her to describe what the draft letter contained. It contains the story she was going to tell Ryan, Hannah said. Her voice was even. She had practiced this evenness until it was not performance, but fact. It's written in her handwriting, and it reads like someone working out what to say before they say it. The language matches what I was told Ryan had said, almost word for word. And the letter to your sister? It says that Lily has always wanted what Hannah has, and that this time Margaret is going to make sure Lily gets it. Hannah looked at the judge when she said it, not at her mother. Those are the words. I've read it many times. Judge Marsh was reading the exhibit. Her face gave nothing away. Marsh cross-examined for 40 minutes. He asked about Hannah's decision not to contact Ryan directly. He asked it several ways, with several framings, working the angle patiently. Hannah answered each version the same way. She had been given information she believed. She had not verified it directly. That was a failure of judgment, not of character, and it was a failure that had been engineered by someone who understood her well enough to know she would be too hurt to reach out. But you didn't reach out, Marsh said. No. And as a result, Mr. Brooks didn't know he had children. As a result of what my mother did, he didn't know. Hannah kept her voice level. She created the situation I was making decisions inside of. I made imperfect decisions inside a situation she created. Those are two different things. Marsh shifted angles. He asked about the name change. Hannah explained it. He asked whether she had made any attempt to inform the children's father during the pregnancy. She said no. He asked whether she had made any attempt to inform extended family. She said she had called her mother 3 weeks after the children were born to say she was alive, she was fine, and she was not coming back. And you didn't mention the children. No. Why not? Hannah paused. Not from uncertainty, but because the honest answer needed a moment. Because my mother had already demonstrated that she was willing to use my relationships to serve her own purposes. I was not going to give her information about my children and then wait to see how she used it. The room was quiet. Marsh looked at his notes. He asked 2 more questions that went nowhere useful for him and sat down. Ryan testified last. He sat in the witness chair with the stillness Hannah had noticed in him when he was containing something, and Paul Draper walked him through his account in the clean, efficient sequence they had prepared. Ryan talked about the phone call from Margaret and what she had told him. He talked about the months that followed, about the marriage to Lily, about what that marriage had looked like and what he had told himself during it. He talked about finding the photograph in the box he was clearing out. He talked about coming to Millhaven. Paul asked him directly, "When you discovered that you had 2 children you hadn't known about, what was your response?" Ryan said, "I wanted to understand how it had happened, and then I wanted to be here." "Were you angry at Hannah Walsh or at Hannah Carter for not telling you?" "I understand why she didn't." He said it simply, without looking at Hannah, which was the right choice. "I'm not going to sit here and say it didn't affect me. Finding out I'd missed 5 years of my children's lives is not something I'll finish processing anytime soon. But the person responsible for that gap is not Hannah. Hannah made decisions inside a situation she'd been lied into. I made the same kind of decisions inside the same lies. The lies came from one place." Marsh cross-examined. He asked Ryan about the decision to move to Millhaven. whether it was pressure on Hannah, whether Ryan had filed for any custody arrangement. "I haven't filed for anything," Ryan said. "Hannah and I are raising our children together. There's nothing to file." "You've made no formal legal arrangement." "We don't need a legal arrangement. We're in agreement." "And if you weren't in agreement?" Ryan looked at Marsh steadily. "We are." Marsh tried the angle twice more and got the same wall. He sat down. Judge Marsh asked both attorneys for brief closing arguments. Marsh gave his. He was professional and measured, and Hannah heard it as though from a slight distance, the way you hear things when you have been in a stressful room for many hours and your body has started to conserve energy. Sandra stood up. "Your Honor," she said, "the petitioner is asking this court to grant access to 2 children she has never met, based on the argument that the children have been unjustly deprived of family connection. The documentation before the court shows that the petitioner is personally responsible for the circumstances she is now using as the basis of her claim. She separated these children's parents through deliberate deception. She disrupted a relationship between 2 adults who would otherwise have raised these children together from the beginning, and now she is asking the court to reward that disruption with access she never earned and has no right to claim." Sandra's voice was even throughout, not passionate, precise. "Both parents are present, stable, in agreement, and opposed to this petition. The children have a life that works. There is no demonstrated harm in the absence of this relationship because there was never a relationship to be absent from. The petition should be dismissed." She sat down. Judge Marsh looked at the file for a moment. She looked at the letters, which were sitting in their plastic exhibit sleeves on the corner of her bench. She looked up. "I'm going to take a recess," she said. 1 hour. They sat in the hallway on a bench that was slightly too hard and slightly too close to the vending machines, and Sandra went to make phone calls, and Paul Draper brought coffee from somewhere and set it down without comment, and Hannah and Ryan sat next to each other and did not talk very much. At one point, Ryan said, "You did well in there. You too. That question about the 5 years, the way you answered it. I practiced it. It sounded real." "It was real," she said. "The practice just meant I could say the real thing without my voice breaking." He was quiet. Then, "Emma was right about the flexible buildings thing." Hannah looked at him. "People who can't move with hard things break instead." He was looking at the middle distance. "That's been us for a while, both of us, bending instead of breaking." She looked at the vending machines, at the fluorescent light above them with the one tube flickering slightly, at her own hands in her lap. "Yeah," she said. "We're still here." "We are." The hour passed the way hours pass when you are waiting for something that will matter, slowly, and then abruptly, without a middle. The clerk came to the hallway door and said the judge was ready. Judge Eleanor Marsh looked at the room with the settled, unimpressible attention of someone who had made decisions like this for 11 years and understood that the decisions had weight. "I've reviewed the petition, the testimony, and the documentary evidence," she said. "I'm going to be direct." She looked at the petitioner's table where Douglas Marsh sat with his hands folded. "The statute governing grandparental visitation in this state requires, at minimum, a demonstrated existing relationship between the petitioner and the children, or a showing that denial would cause demonstrable harm. The petitioner has no existing relationship with the children. They have never met. There is no history of care, connection, or involvement of any kind." She paused. "The petitioner argues that this absence of relationship is itself evidence of harm, that the children have been denied a grandparent. I find this argument unpersuasive on its face, and the documentary evidence introduced today renders it untenable." She picked up one of the exhibit sleeves. She set it down. A letter written by the petitioner to her daughter, not the respondent, but her other daughter, demonstrates a clear premeditated intention to separate the respondent from the father of her children. A draft letter, also in the petitioner's handwriting, establishes that the phone call used to implement this deception was scripted in advance. These documents, combined with credible eyewitness testimony, paint a coherent picture of a person who engineered the respondent's isolation and is now petitioning this court for access to the children whose existence resulted from that isolation. She looked up. "The court will not reward that conduct with a visitation order." She put the file down. "The petition is dismissed. The petitioner is to have no contact with the minor children, Noah Carter Brooks and Emma Carter Brooks, without the express written consent of both parents. Any future petition must demonstrate a substantial change in circumstances, which this court would scrutinize carefully in light of today's record. She looked at Marsh. Counsel, please advise your client. She stood. The clerk called the room to order, and then it was over. Mom. It didn't feel like Hannah had imagined it might feel. She had imagined, in the brief moments she'd allowed herself to imagine it going well, something that felt like release, like the specific exhale of a pressure valve. What she actually felt was quieter than that and more complicated. Not flat, not anticlimactic, just real. The particular reality of something actually being finished, which never feels as clean as the idea of it, because by the time you get there, you're tired and you've been carrying it for a long time, and your body doesn't know immediately how to put the weight down. Sandra put her hand on Hannah's arm briefly. Well done, she said, which was lawyer language for I believed in this, and it held. Paul Draper shook Ryan's hand and said he'd send the formal paperwork within the week. In the gallery, Margaret Carter stood. She was looking at Hannah, and for the first time since Hannah could remember, her mother's face did not have the quality of managed composure. It had something underneath it, not defeat exactly, not guilt exactly, something that might have been, in someone else, the beginning of understanding what she had done. Hannah looked at her mother. She did not feel triumph. She had thought she might, and she didn't. What she felt was something more tired and more honest than triumph, the feeling of someone who had stood in front of something they'd built and not moved, and had not been required to move, and who now had to figure out what to do with all the space that opened up on the other side of that. She turned away from her mother and walked toward the door. Ryan fell into step beside her, and they walked out of the courtroom together, down the beige hallway with the fluorescent lighting, and into the elevator. And neither of them said anything until the elevator opened and they were in the lobby, and the February light was coming through the glass doors. Then Ryan said, "Let's go home." She looked at the light in the doors, at the parking lot beyond it, her car and his car side by side, the drive back to Millhaven, the kids at Deb's house waiting, the apartment on Clement Street with the fixed front hinge and the kitchen window looking out on Eleanor's garden. "Yeah," she said. They went through the doors and into the cold air, and the day was plain and gray and bright in the way of winter days that don't pretend to be anything but what they are. And she walked to her car, and he walked to his, and they drove home. Bon. Deb had made soup. Hannah didn't ask how she'd known to make soup, which was the kind of question you didn't need to ask with Deb, because Deb knew things about what people needed the way some people know weather. Not by calculation, but by a long habit of paying attention. There was a pot on the stove and bread from the place on Clement Street, and the kids were at the kitchen table doing a puzzle with the concentration of people who had been told to stay occupied and had taken the instructions seriously. Noah looked up when Hannah came in. "How was the meeting?" "Good," Hannah said. "It went well. Can we have screen time now?" "After dinner." He looked at the bread. "Is that from the place with the pastries?" "Yes." "Can we have a pastry now?" "No." "After dinner?" "We'll see." He returned to the puzzle, apparently satisfied with "we'll see," which was a level of optimism she appreciated. Emma hadn't looked up when Hannah came in. She was focused on a corner section of the puzzle, fitting pieces together with methodical patience. But when Hannah came to the table and sat down, Emma leaned slightly sideways until her shoulder was touching Hannah's arm, and left it there. She didn't say anything. She just leaned. Hannah put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, and Emma went back to the puzzle, and Ryan came through the door with Deb behind him, who had gone down to help carry something, and the kitchen filled with the noise of people and the smell of soup and the particular density of an ordinary evening that had been hard-earned. It was not perfect. It was not the ending of anything so much as it was the clearing of ground. There were still things to navigate: the formal paperwork, the conversation with the children about what had been decided and how to frame it for 5-year-olds, the long question of what to do with the relationship with her mother, which the court had addressed legally, but not humanly, which was its own separate and slower work. There was still the question of her and Ryan, which she had said she wanted to address, and which she intended to address, but not tonight. Tonight was for soup and bread and the puzzle and the ordinary weight of her daughter leaning against her arm. She would get to the rest. She was good at getting to things. She had proven that over and over in the 5.5 years since she had driven north out of a city that had stopped being hers, alone and scared and more stubborn than she'd known she was. She had gotten to every hard thing eventually. She had not done it gracefully every time, or without cost, or without mistakes she still carried. But she had gotten there. She would get to the rest. The soup was gone by 7 and the bread was mostly gone, and Noah had eaten 2.5 bowls, which was more than anyone had expected, and which he reported to Deb with great satisfaction, as though personal consumption records were worth tracking. Emma had eaten 1 bowl carefully and completely, which was how she did most things, and had gone back to the puzzle after dinner with the focused determination of someone with unfinished business. Ryan washed the pot. Deb dried it. Hannah sat at the table and watched her children and felt, underneath the tiredness, something that didn't have a clean name. Not relief exactly, not happiness exactly, but something in that neighborhood, something that lived close to the feeling of a window being opened in a room that had been closed for a long time. Deb left at 8:30, squeezing Hannah's shoulder on the way out in the specific way that meant, "I know, and you don't have to say anything, and I'll call you tomorrow." Ryan stayed for bedtime, and afterward they sat at the kitchen table with the last of the coffee and the quiet that the apartment got when the children were finally down, that particular weighted stillness. "She's not going to try again," Hannah said. "Legally. Sandra said the record makes it too difficult." "I know. But she's still out there." "Yes." Ryan turned his coffee mug in his hands. "She is." Hannah looked at the table. "I've been thinking about that. What I do with her being out there. Whether there's anything to do." She paused. "She's 63 years old and she lost Lily, and whatever she is, she's also a woman who spent her whole life engineering things and still ended up alone. And I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it." "I know, but I keep thinking about it anyway." She looked up. "I'm not going to call her. I'm not going to reach out. Not now, maybe not for a long time. But I also don't want to spend the next 10 years carrying this specific weight of hating her because it's heavy and it doesn't help the kids and it doesn't help me." She exhaled. "That's not forgiveness. I want to be clear about that. It's just putting it down, deciding not to carry it anymore because it belongs to her, not to me." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "That's harder than hating her." "I know, hating her is easy. I've been doing it in the background for years. And now?" She thought about it honestly. "Now I'm tired, and tired of it. And I think she's going to have to live with what she did in whatever way she's capable of living with it. And that's between her and herself, and I have other things to build." He looked at her across the table. "I said something to you," she said, "the night before the hearing, about figuring out what we are after this was over." "I remember. This is after." "Yes." She looked at her coffee. "I don't know how to do this, Ryan. I want to be honest about that. I know how to do a lot of things. I know how to raise children alone and manage a classroom and fix most of the things that break in an apartment before spending money on a repairman. I don't know how to open something back up that I closed so completely." "I know. I'm going to be bad at it sometimes." "I know that too. And I need it to be slow." "Hannah." His voice was even and direct in equal measure. "I've been here since October. I moved my professional life 400 miles. I spent 3 months learning how your kids take their eggs in the morning and which way Emma wears her backpack and why Noah counts the cracks in the sidewalk when he's nervous. I'm not asking you to be ready. I'm asking you to be willing." She looked at him. "Are you willing?" he asked. She sat with the question, not performing the sitting, actually sitting with it, the way she'd learned to sit with things over 5.5 years of making decisions that mattered without anyone to run them past. "Yes," she said, "I'm willing." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not dramatically, not as a declaration, just put it there, the way you put your hand on something real to confirm it's real. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat like that for a while, in the kitchen, with the coffee going cold and the wind chimes outside catching the February air and the apartment doing its quiet nighttime breathing around them. It was not a beginning in the cinematic sense. It was not scored or lit for it. It was two people in a kitchen at 9:30 on a Tuesday night in a small town, holding hands across a table that had mismatched chairs, choosing to start from where they were. That was all it was. It was not nothing. Spring came to Millhaven the way it always did, gradually and then insistently, the cold losing its confidence in small daily increments. Until one morning you walked outside and the air had changed and you couldn't remember exactly when it happened. Eleanor's garden came back. The tree Noah had claimed at the schoolyard got its leaves again, and he reported this to Ryan with the satisfaction of someone whose property had been restored. Field day was the second Friday in April. Hannah had forgotten that she'd told Noah it was not yet decided, and Noah had apparently remembered, and he had not brought it up again, but she had caught him, twice, looking at Ryan across the dinner table with the specific calculating expression of someone deciding whether to press their case. Emma had seen this too and had given Noah a brief look that said, "Don't," which Noah had mostly respected. On a Thursday evening in late March, Ryan said, out of nowhere, "Can I come to field day?" Noah's head came up from the book he was nominally reading. "Yes," Hannah said, because she had made the decision somewhere in February and just hadn't said it yet. Noah put the book down entirely. He looked at Ryan with an expression of such uncomplicated happiness that Ryan had to look away briefly to collect himself. "I'm in the relay," Noah said. "And the sack race. I'm not doing the three-legged race because last year Marcus and I fell down twice, and Marcus cried, and I didn't, but it was close." "Three-legged race is genuinely hard," Ryan said. "It requires the other person to match your stride length. Mine is longer than Marcus's. That's the problem." "I know. Emma said we had incompatible gaits." Emma said that. She said a lot of other things too, but that was the main one. Emma, from across the room, did not look up from her book. "I said your stride patterns were too different to synchronize under pressure." That's a direct quote. "She remembers everything she says," Noah told Ryan confidentially. "I do," Emma confirmed. Ryan looked at Hannah over the children's heads, and she looked back, and what passed between them in that moment was not spoken and didn't need to be. The specific shared understanding of two people who have, together and separately, done the hard work of getting somewhere and are now standing in it, recognizing what it is. She had started thinking about the library in January. Millhaven's library was a single-room building on the corner of Clement and 4th that served as both the public library and, in a loosely organized way, the community meeting space. It had 1,200 books by Gerald Osai's estimate, which he'd given her once when she asked, and a children's section that occupied one corner with a rug and 3 low shelves and a shelf of picture books that had not been updated in several years. The library was open 4 days a week, staffed by a volunteer named Patricia, who was in her 70s and had been the librarian since before the current building was built, and who had strong opinions about the Dewey Decimal System and equally strong opinions about the general indifference of the county toward funding it adequately. Hannah had been going to the library since she moved to Millhaven, first for herself and then for the twins, and she had been watching it with the particular attention of someone who sees a need and is working up the nerve to address it. She talked to Patricia about it in February, in the week after the hearing. She said she'd been thinking about an after-school reading program for elementary-age kids, something structured, regular, something that would bring children into the library on a day it was currently closed. Patricia had looked at her with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific conversation for a long time. "I've been asking the county for a programming budget for 6 years," Patricia said. "They send me a form to fill out, and then they lose the form." "What if we didn't wait for the county?" Patricia looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean I run the program, volunteer basis to start. We apply for a small grant. There are literacy grants through the State Education Board. I've been looking into it. We get the books donated, or use what's here plus what the school can share. We run it one afternoon a week and see what the attendance looks like." Hannah paused. "If it works, we have a proof of concept. If it works consistently, we have a case to take to the county." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You'd have to deal with the county yourself. I don't have the patience anymore." "I'll deal with the county." Patricia looked at her for another moment with the assessing gaze of a woman who had spent 50 years evaluating whether people would follow through on things they said. "All right," she said. "When do you want to start?" Hannah had started in March, on Wednesdays, in the hour after school. She'd announced it to her class first, and then sent a flyer home to all the elementary families. The first Wednesday, 9 children showed up. The second Wednesday, 14. By the end of March, she had a consistent group of 18, which was more than the corner rug could comfortably hold, and she'd borrowed chairs from the stack in the back and arranged them in a rough circle, and it worked well enough. She read to them. She let them read to each other. She brought books from her own classroom and raided the school's surplus shelf and spent $40 of her own money on paperbacks from the used bookstore in the next town over. She taught them, without calling it teaching, how to talk about what they'd read, what stuck with them, what confused them, what reminded them of something in their own lives. Cody, the boy who had struggled with reading all year, came every single Wednesday. He sat in the same chair each time, slightly apart from the others at first, and he listened with the focused attention of someone for whom listening was easier than reading and who had decided that listening was still worthwhile. In the 4th week, he read aloud for the first time, 4 sentences from a picture book, halting, slower than the others, but he got there. The other children waited without being told to. Hannah said, when he finished, "Good," which was all she said, because she had learned over years of teaching that children do not need ceremony for the things they're proud of, just acknowledgement. Cody looked at the book in his lap for a moment. Then he looked up. "Can I read the next page?" "Yes," Hannah said. He read the next page. Ryan came to the library one Wednesday in April, not to participate, but because he had picked the kids up from the after-program gathering at Deb's and brought them to Clement Street, and they had stopped in front of the library on the way home because Hannah's light was still on inside. Emma had wanted to look through the window. Noah had pressed his face against the glass and reported back that there were kids sitting in chairs and Mom was reading something to them. Ryan stood on the sidewalk and looked through the window at Hannah in the library. She was sitting in one of the borrowed chairs at the center of the circle, and she was reading from a book he couldn't identify at this distance, and the children around her were very still in the particular stillness of people who are being genuinely held by a story. She was not performing. She was not doing anything except reading, but there was something in the quality of her attention that transmitted through the glass, and he understood, watching her, something he had been circling for months without finding the right words for. She was someone who built things, not in the abstract, actually, concretely, with her hands and her time and her patience, in the specific place she was standing. She had built the apartment into a home, and the town into a community, and the library afternoon into something that mattered to 18 children who showed up every week because it was worth showing up for. She had built 2 people who were, against every difficult circumstance of their beginning, genuinely remarkable in ways that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with the consistency of what they'd been given. He had known this. He had known it since October, but there was something about seeing it through a window, unselfconscious and unaware of being watched, that made it land differently. Emma tugged his sleeve. "Can we go in?" "She's still working." "I know. I just want to be in there." He looked at her. Emma's face was its usual composed watchfulness, but underneath it was something that was simply this. She wanted to be where her mother was. She had always wanted that. It was the most straightforward thing about her. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." He pushed open the door and the 3 of them went in. The grant came through in May. It was small, $4,000 from the State Education Board's Community Literacy Fund, enough to buy a proper book collection and pay for materials through the end of the year. Hannah received the email on a Thursday morning before school and sat at her kitchen table and read it 3 times. She called Patricia. "I told you it would work," Patricia said. "You didn't tell me that. You said all right and let me do it." "That's the same thing." Gerald Osei released Hannah for 1 additional afternoon per week to develop the program, calling it professional development in her contract amendment, which was generous and also pragmatic because 3 parents of Wednesday library children had mentioned it at the last school board meeting as a reason Mill Haven Elementary was worth supporting. Things that produce goodwill at school board meetings were things Gerald Osei accommodated. The program went to 2 afternoons a week in the fall. Hannah applied for a second grant in September and was awarded it in November. By January, she had a waiting list. She didn't talk about it as an achievement. She talked about it the way she talked about most things she built. Practically, in terms of what was working and what needed adjustment and what the next problem was. Patricia called her a force of nature once, and Hannah had said, "I'm just filling a gap." And Patricia had said, "People who fill gaps are forces of nature." And Hannah had thought about this later and not entirely disagreed. Noah and Emma turned 6 in October, and for the first time in their lives, their birthday party included a person from their father's side of things. Ryan had an older sister named Claire who lived in Memphis with her husband and 3 children, and Claire had called Ryan in August with the directness of a sibling who has been patient long enough and said, "I want to meet them." Ryan had talked to Hannah about it. Hannah had said, "Give me a few weeks." A few weeks passed, and she said, "The birthday makes sense." Claire drove up from Memphis on a Saturday with her husband Joel and their youngest, a 7-year-old named Marcus, not Noah's Marcus from school, a different Marcus, and arrived with a cake she'd made herself because she'd asked Ryan what the kids liked. And Ryan had reported back Hannah's answer, which was that Emma liked things that were precise, and Noah liked things that were large. And Claire had interpreted this as a cake that was architecturally elaborate on one side and excessively covered in frosting on the other, which was one of the better things Hannah had seen anyone do with a first impression. Emma had studied the cake. "The layers are even," she said. "Thank you," Claire said. "That's actually hard to do." "I know. I've seen Mom try." Hannah, from across the room. "Emma." "It's true," Emma said without apology. Claire laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that meant she was going to be fine, that this was a person Emma could work with, and Emma registered this and adjusted her assessment accordingly. Hannah watched the adjustment happen in real time and felt something loosen slightly in her chest. The party was loud and imperfect, and the frosting from Noah's side of the cake ended up on 3 different surfaces it had not started on, and Marcus from Memphis and Noah spent 45 minutes in the back bedroom discovering a shared interest in increasingly elaborate crash scenarios for Noah's toy cars, and Emma and Claire's oldest, a 9-year-old named Grace, who was serious and precise in ways that immediately spoke to Emma, sat at the kitchen table and talked about books with the intensity of a graduate seminar. And Ryan and Joel stood in the corner with the comfortable ease of men who have been told enough about each other by someone they both love that they already have approximate coordinates. Hannah stood in the middle of her apartment and watched her children be in the world and thought, "This is what I built." Not the party, not the apartment or the library program or the legal victory or any single thing, all of it together, the accumulation of small decisions made inside hard circumstances. The choice every morning to keep building when stopping would have been easier. This was what it amounted to. A Saturday in October with cake on the counter and her daughter explaining plot structure to a 9-year-old and her son inventing catastrophes with a boy he'd met an hour ago. And Ryan across the room looking over at her periodically, the way he'd started doing, the specific way that meant "I see you" and meaning it. It was not a perfect life. She wanted to be clear about that, even to herself. She still had months where the money was tighter than she wanted, and she made decisions she second-guessed, and she lost her patience with the kids in ways that sent her down the hall afterward, feeling like she'd failed something. She still had nights where the weight of the years came back in the specific way of grief that you think you've put down and find still sitting in the corner. She was still, in many small and daily ways, figuring it out. But it was real, and it was hers, and she had made it from the inside out, from the ground up, from the single stubborn decision not to let the worst thing that happened to her become the last thing she was. She and Ryan went on their first official date in November. She'd been resistant to the word date for a while, partly because of what the word implied about starting over as though the previous 10 months hadn't happened, and partly because she was 36 years old, and the idea of going on a date felt somehow adolescent in a way she couldn't entirely justify. Ryan had said one evening in late October, "I'd like to take you to dinner, in a restaurant, just the 2 of us. You can call it whatever you want." She'd called it dinner, which was accurate if not complete, and Deb had watched the kids, and they'd driven to a restaurant in the next town that Ryan had looked up, and that turned out to be small and good, and the kind of place that didn't require you to perform occasion. They talked for 3 hours. Not about the children, or the legal situation, or the history, or any of the things that had been the substance of most of their conversations for the past year. They talked about other things. About the buildings Ryan was designing for the Nashville office. About a book Hannah had just finished that she had complicated feelings about. About a trip Claire had taken the family on the previous summer that Ryan had been telling Joel about. About a student in Hannah's class who had written a story about a dog who solved mysteries that was so specific and confident in its premise that it had made Hannah laugh out loud while grading. At some point, Ryan said, "Tell me something I don't know about you." Hannah thought about it. "I used to want to be an architect." He looked at her. "When I was about 12. I went through a phase. I drew floor plans of houses I wanted to build. Very elaborate. Lots of windows." She looked at the table. "My mother told me I should be practical." "What happened to the drawings?" "I don't know. She cleaned my room once when I was at school, and I couldn't find them afterward." Ryan was quiet. "I don't say that as... I'm not cataloging her failures. I'm just telling you a thing." Hannah picked up her glass. "I became a teacher, which is also something I wanted, and which is practical in a completely different way than she meant. So it worked out." "You still could," Ryan said. "Be an architect, or study it, or anything adjacent." "I'm 36. "And?" She looked at him. "Is this you being encouraging, or are you genuinely unaware that there's a logistical reality?" "I'm aware there's a logistical reality. I'm saying it's not a wall." He held her gaze. "You built a literacy program out of an underfunded library in a Wednesday afternoon. You have construction instincts. You just applied them to people instead of buildings." She looked at him for a moment. "That's either the nicest thing you've said to me or the most absurd." "Possibly both," she smiled. Not the careful, managed smile she'd worn for much of the past year when things were still being negotiated, and she wasn't sure what she was allowed to feel. A real one. The kind that came from somewhere genuine. "Tell me something I don't know about you," she said. He thought about it. "I almost didn't come to Mill Haven." She looked up. "I had the photograph out. I'd been carrying it for months. I was going to hire someone to find you, which felt wrong, so I kept not doing it. And then one morning, I just got in the car." He paused. "I drove past the city limits and I thought, if she tells me to leave, I'll leave. And then I thought, she might tell me to leave and I'm going anyway. And then I stopped thinking about it and just drove." Hannah was quiet. "If you'd told me to leave," he said, "I would have respected it. But I don't think I could have stopped trying to know that you were all right. That they were all right." He looked at the table. "That's probably something I should have examined more before I showed up at a classroom with a screwdriver." "It was a good screwdriver. Noah still has it. He keeps it in the important box." Ryan looked at her. The restaurant had gotten quieter around them, the late dinner crowd thinning out, the kitchen sounds settling. In the candlelight, he looked like someone who had done a hard thing and come out on the other side of it not unmarked but still standing, which was the only honest way anyone came out of anything. "I'm glad I drove," he said. "So am I," she said, and meant it completely. There is something that happens to people who have been through the specific kind of loss that comes not from death or disaster, but from being deliberately misled by someone who was supposed to be on their side. The loss is harder to name than grief. It doesn't have the clean edges of something ended. It has the particular quality of something stolen, not just the years, but the confidence that your own understanding of the world is reliable, that the people in your family are who they present themselves to be, that the story you are living is the one actually happening. Hannah had lived inside that particular damage for a long time. She had not, if she was being honest, fully understood the extent of it until she was far enough out of it to look back. You don't see the shape of a thing when you're standing inside it. You only see the walls. What she understood 2 years out from the February hearing and the quiet evening in the kitchen when she had held Ryan's hand across the table and decided to be willing, what she understood was that the damage had not been undone. It had not been reversed or erased or resolved by the court ruling or by Ryan's presence or by the library program or by any particular thing. It had simply been, over time and by accumulation, folded into everything else, made part of the story without being the center of it anymore. That was not a small thing. That was, in fact, the whole thing. Ouch. She told Patricia about it once, in a sideways way, on a Tuesday afternoon when the library was empty and they were reshelving a new donation of chapter books. Patricia was in her 70s and had lived in Millhaven her whole life, and had, over the course of a long marriage and its ending and the years after, developed the specific patience of someone who understands that most of what matters in a life accumulates slowly and cannot be rushed. Hannah said, in the middle of shelving a book, "Do you think people change? Actually change, not just adjust?" Patricia didn't look up from the shelf. "What kind of change are you talking about?" "The kind where you become someone who does things differently because you've understood something, not just older or tireder, actually different." Patricia put a book in place, considered it. "I think people build things," she said. "Whether that's the same as changing, I'm not sure. The building changes the landscape around them. The person at the center is probably pretty much the person at the center." She looked at Hannah. "Why?" "I've been thinking about whether I'm different than I was." "Are you?" Hannah thought about it. "I think I'm the same person who left, and also I'm not." She looked at the shelf. "I trust more slowly, I'm more careful, but I'm more willing to build things, less afraid that building means something can be taken." She paused. "Maybe that's what change is. Not a different person, but a different relationship to what you're capable of." Patricia looked at her for a moment. "You should teach adults," she said, "not just children." Hannah looked at her. "I mean it. The way you think about things. Someone should have access to that who can use it." Hannah looked back at the shelf. "I'm working on it," she said, which was not quite true yet, but was the direction she was pointing. The following fall, Hannah began a night course at the community college in the next county. Not architecture. She had looked at that and done the math, and it was too much, too long, too far from where she was, and she had made her peace with being someone who had wanted one thing and built another that turned out to matter more. What she enrolled in was a certification program in educational administration, because Patricia was right, and because Gerald Osei had said something 3 months ago in his understated way that she'd been thinking about since. "If you ever want a different set of problems, I'll be moving on in a few years, and this district will need someone who knows how to build something from not much." She drove to the college one night a week. Ryan was home with the kids. She drove back in the dark with the radio on low and the Tennessee hills black against the sky, and she thought about things that were not the past, about curriculum and administration and what a school district needed when its resources were thin but its intentions were not, about the library program and what it would look like if it expanded, about the students she had known over 3 years of teaching second grade and what they had needed from her beyond reading and arithmetic. She thought about what it meant to build things for other people's children as deliberately as she had built things for her own. She thought about the 12-year-old girl who drew floor plans of houses with lots of windows and whose mother had told her to be practical. She thought about what she would say to that girl now, if she could. Not what to do differently, because the life that came from the decisions made in the aftermath of that discouraged 12-year-old had produced Noah and Emma and Millhaven and the library and Ryan across the kitchen table at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. It had produced, against all the things that had worked against it, something genuinely worth having. What she would tell that girl was simpler than advice. It was just, "You'll keep building, even when things are taken, even when you have to start from ground that isn't ideal, in conditions that aren't what you chose. You'll keep building because that's what you do, and what you build will not look like what you planned, and it will be better." She would tell her, "The plans you drew were never wasted. They just went into something you couldn't see from where you were standing." So, on a Sunday in March, 2.5 years after the February hearing, 6 months into the night courses, 4 months after Ryan had rented an apartment that was technically separate from Hannah's, and technically the place he slept 3 nights a week when the kids were with Deb, and that everyone, including the kids, understood was a transitional fiction they were all politely maintaining. Noah said at breakfast, with the casual directness that was his particular gift, "Are you and Dad going to live together?" Hannah looked at her eggs. Ryan looked at his coffee. Emma did not look up from her book, but she was listening. "We're figuring it out," Hannah said. "How much longer does figuring it out take?" Noah: "I'm just asking, because Marcus at school, The Marcus from Memphis, not the one from here. Marcus says his parents figured it out in like a month. He ate a piece of toast. But they were also getting divorced, so maybe that's different. That's very different, Hannah said. Okay. He ate more toast, apparently satisfied. Emma turned a page. She said without looking up, "Take the time you need." She said it with the flat certainty of someone making a factual statement, not offering comfort. It was advice the way a true thing is advice. Just the true thing, offered simply. Hannah looked at her daughter. Emma's eyes were on her book. 6 years old, and she already understood, without anyone having taught her, that the right pace for something important was whatever pace allowed it to be real. "Thank you," Hannah said. Emma turned another page. They moved in together in June. Not into Hannah's apartment. They found a house 3 blocks from the school, with a yard that backed up to a field and a kitchen big enough for 4 people to exist in at once, and 2 rooms for the children that they chose themselves with an extended seriousness that suggested the decision was permanent, and they knew it. Emma chose the room with the east-facing window because she had done research on light quality, and the east window was better for reading in the morning. Noah chose the room next to hers because that was where Noah was going to be. The move took a weekend. Deb came. Claire drove up from Memphis with Joel and helped carry boxes and stayed for dinner the first night in the new house, which was pizza on the floor because the table wasn't up yet. And it was chaotic and loud, and someone knocked over a drink, and Noah tried to help clean it up and made it worse, and Emma directed the cleanup operation from a position of authority she had not been given but had simply occupied. And Ryan and Joel assembled the bookshelf in the wrong order and had to disassemble it and start again. And Hannah sat on the floor with her back against the wall and watched all of it and felt, underneath the chaos, the particular quiet of someone who is exactly where they are supposed to be. She had not arrived here cleanly. That was the truest thing she could say about it. She had arrived here through 5 years of being alone when she should not have been alone, through a courtroom and a manila folder of evidence and a lawyer who told her to document everything. She had arrived here through a long and careful opening of something she had sealed shut, because sealed shut was the only way she could function for a while. She had arrived here because she had driven north one night without a plan and made a life out of the stubbornness of someone who had decided she was not going to stop building just because something had been taken. Was it enough? The arriving? Was the house and the yard and the children in their chosen rooms and the man assembling the bookshelf in the wrong order enough to account for everything that had come before it? No. It wasn't accounting. It wasn't balance or compensation or any of the mathematics of fair. Life did not offer that, and she had stopped expecting it early enough to be grateful rather than bitter. What it offered, if you were paying attention and willing to stay in the room, was accumulation. One thing and then another thing, the bad and the good, mixed together in proportions you didn't get to choose, and what you made of the accumulation was what you made. She had made this. Ryan looked across the room at her, over the chaos of boxes and children and the ongoing bookshelf situation. And she looked back, and he smiled, and she smiled, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing that needed saying. Later that night, when the children were in their new rooms, in their new beds with their known objects arranged around them in the particular order that made them feel located, and the house was quiet and still, and smelled of cardboard and new paint and the faint trace of the pizza they'd eaten on the floor, Hannah stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the yard. The field beyond the fence was dark. The sky above it was the particular deep blue of late June nights, not black yet, holding on to the last of the day's light in that slow way of the long days. She had been a woman who drove north one night with 2 months of pregnancy and 2 letters she'd taken without knowing why, and the particular stubbornness of someone who had run out of other options. She was a woman who ran a literacy program and was studying for a certification and lived in a house with a yard that backed up to a field. She was a woman whose children were asleep in rooms they had chosen, and whose, she was going to say it, she was choosing to say it, even just to herself, whose partner was in the next room doing something with a wrench and a bookshelf, and was probably going to need help. She was not the same woman who had driven north. She was also exactly that woman, carrying everything that woman had been and done. And the carrying was not a burden. It was the material. It was what she'd built everything else out of. She heard Ryan say from the living room, with the controlled frustration of someone who has been beaten by furniture, "I need a second opinion on this bracket." She pushed off the window. "Coming," she said, and she went.